everybody. Welcome back to Crime Weekly. I'm Stephanie Harlow.
And I'm Derek Levasseur.
So today we are diving into part 5 of the Hae Min Lee and Adnan Syed series. I know it's long and there's still so much to talk about. It's crazy how there's still so much to talk about and so much to go over. We have an episode tonight that is jam-packed full of details and discussions to be had and really, things that need to be like dug into. And I can't wait to get your guys' opinion in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube, because this really is something that needs to be discussed with a hive mind. So I'm glad we have you guys to talk about it, because there's so many things that just have occurred to me since I've been diving back into this case, and I'm seeing it in a much different way than I ever have. And I'll leave it at that for now. But before we dive in, do you want to get anything off your chest? Talk about anything?
No, I want to dive into the case too. I'll just say, I want to bring up Criminal Coffee. When you're listening to this episode or you're watching it on YouTube, Stephanie and I are currently in Utah at the time of this video or audio being released. We're going out to Utah to meet up with the people over at Intermountain Forensics to talk about the Preble County Penny case, or Preble Penny case. And we're going to get to kind of see the behind the scenes in the lab at what they do, how they extract the DNA from her bones, all that stuff that's very important to us. And if you want to be part of it, we've already had a lot of people buy coffee. Your funds were directly contributing to the testing that we're able to do. We were able to donate $5,000 to Intermountain Forensics for this testing, but we want this to be the first of many. So if you're interested in some good coffee and giving back to a really good cause like fighting crime, head on over to criminalcoffeeco.com. Check us out. We got 3 different blends you can check out, or 1 blend, 2 roasts, and they're all very good, but we're biased. There's also the True Crime Universe you can check out as well, see the different characters, see their adventures. Stephanie writes those stories. And then finally, just it's a teaser, but it's coming. We just approved it all. Merchandise. A lot of you have been asking about it. Criminal Coffee merch is coming. We have literally seen all the samples, all the designs. I was actually wearing one of the sweatshirts, just a blank, to make sure we really liked the material. Stephanie has stuff coming to her house as well. So there's a lot going on with Criminal Coffee. We're super excited about it. We're going to be doing some stuff on our socials. So that's the other thing. Make sure you're following our personal socials, but also make sure you're following Criminal Coffee, which is at Drink Criminal Coffee on Instagram and TikTok. And it's Drink Criminal on Twitter.
Yes, amazing. And listen, it's there's some weird weather patterns happening in the United States right now. A lot of people probably don't know this because I keep it hidden. I'm embarrassed, but I'm kind of a nerd and I like weather. And in my spare time, I listen to like YouTube channels who talk about weather like every day. And I told Derek, like, it's going to be snowing in Utah, so make sure you bring like a coat and boots. And he kind of laughed at me, and I feel like he's not going to be prepared. But you know who's going to be prepared with her puffy jacket and snow boots? Me. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to be inside most of the time, hopefully. And our airport is like 20 minutes from the lab, and our hotel's right in between that. So I'm going to be in the Uber going from place to place, and I'm going to try to avoid the snow. But in fairness to you, if I find myself in a position where I'm up to my knees in snow, I promise to take a photo and post it to Instagram of me freezing my ass off, because you told me to wear a jacket and boots and I chose not to.
Are you really going to choose not to?
No, I'm going to bring a jacket. We're going to Utah. But, right. I'm not going to I'm not preparing for a blizzard, but I just totally jinxed myself. So there we are.
There's going to be a blizzard, man. You should see these crazy weather things that are happening right now. It is so cool. Anyways, let's dive into the episode. Before I just start talking to you about hot spells and cold air and hurricanes that are happening in Florida again. Sorry about that, guys. It sucks. So let's dive into episode 5 of the Hae Min Lee and Adnan Syed series. Last week, if you were here, I'm sure you were here, because you probably wouldn't be here today if you weren't here last week, but we talked about Jay Wilds and his first version of events, the things that he said happened on the day and night of January 13th, 1999, when Hae Min Lee went missing. So Jay gave this initial statement to police on February 28th, 1999. And after he gave that statement, he led law enforcement to the location of Hae's car. Her 1998 silver Nissan Sentra was parked in a grassy lot behind a series of row houses in Baltimore's Allendale area, specifically a location behind 300 Edgewood Street. Now, the vehicle was not processed at the scene. It was towed to the Baltimore Police Department headquarters downtown, and on that same day, they began to lift fingerprints and collect physical evidence from the vehicle. There's a lot of stuff to talk about with Hae's car, so let's, get going, starting down the list. And it's actually really sad. I found myself kind of feeling a little melancholy when I was reading this inventory list of what they found in her car, because it really reminds you that Hae was just like a typical teenage girl, a girl who kept way too many things in her car, who probably didn't clean her car or organize it enough because it kind of was a mess. But you know what? So was my car when I was 17, 18, 19, and 20. And there's just stuff in there that reminds you she had hobbies and passions and a future too. She was planning things for the future. So Hae's field hockey and lacrosse sticks, they were found in her car. There was also a blue book bag, a dark blue book bag. And this book bag had a leather brown bottom. That was found in her car as well in the back seat. Inside the book bag, they found a copy of Shakespeare's Othello. They also found proofs of Hae's senior pictures along with a portrait order form. They found a 1998-1999 Woodlawn High School agenda book with Hae's name on the information page and Don's name written all over the inside front cover. Also inside the agenda was a picture of Hae in the arms of a young man dressed in a military uniform. And apparently Hae had signed this picture and addressed it to someone named Jake, who the police thought must have been an ex-boyfriend because his name was also found on the date April 4th in the calendar portion of Hae's agenda. And so I was looking at the inventory sheet and they said something like, oh, this must have been an ex-boyfriend and April 4th would have been their 1-year anniversary. But then I found a reference to Jake in a memo written by a member of Adnan's defense team. And Adnan told his lawyers that Jake was not Hae's ex-boyfriend. He was a friend of Hae's who'd attended college in Atlanta and who had died in the summer of 1998. And according to Adnan, Hae had described Jake as the only person who really knew her, and so Adnan and some of Hae's friends were surprised when she didn't tell them about Jake's death until 2 weeks after he had passed away. They also recovered a blue and white and green striped t-shirt on the front left seat with what looked like blood on it. Now, this blood was later confirmed to be human blood, and they also found 2 hairs on the shirt. DNA testing revealed the blood matched Hae Min Lee, and the hairs on the shirt were not a match for Adnan Syed or Jay Wilds. There was an empty juice carton in the back seat and some roses and baby breath wrapped in plastic along with a packet of flower food. There was also an intro to psychology textbook, the lid to a travel mug, a receipt for gas from an ExxonMobil from January 5th, a floppy disk marked school stuff, and 1 pair of black heeled dress shoes, women's size 7. Now, these are the shoes that everybody sort of assumed Hae had been wearing the day of her death. These are the shoes where those 4 DNA profiles were found, none of which matched Adnan or Jay Wilds. And yeah, these are the shoes they assume she was wearing that day because her grandmother saw her leave the house wearing black shoes. I've always wondered why they assumed that they were the shoes she was wearing that day, but it does seem that that's the general consensus. They also found a pair of black socks, a size 7 pinstriped skirt that wouldn't cover anyone's butt. At least that was according to the police inventory report. They found a pair of Nike cleats sized 5.5, some stuffed animals, a happy birthday crown, the note to Don talking about the Randallston match and the interview that she had at school. We discussed this note pretty early on in this series, I would say maybe episode 2. They also found the bottom 2/3 of a paycheck from Royal Metro Corporation Mobile Medical Transport made out to Adnan Syed. The pay period of the check was 10/24/98 to 11/6/98, and it was dated 11/13/98. In the glove box, they recovered the vehicle registration, a map of the Baltimore Zoo, an empty gift box, a heart charm with the price tag still attached, a UBMC undergrad admissions card, and some papers and mail from family members, such as her brother and uncle. So it wasn't from them, it was like for them. There was a credit card application, like her uncle's name, stuff like that. Probably she just grabbed it out of the mailbox, put it in her car, and was going to bring it in later. And maybe she forgot, or I don't know. Also in the car, the police found one of those big map books for driving directions, the kind that people would use before everyone had a cell phone with GPS. They dusted the car for fingerprints and, basically they found a bunch of fingerprints. They found Adnan's fingerprints on a bunch of things. They didn't find Jay Wilde's fingerprints on anything. So in the trunk, there was a bunch of paper and envelopes, and one of those envelopes postmarked October 3rd, 1998. This had Adnan's fingerprints on it, as did the card inside the envelope. His fingerprints were also found on the nationwide insurance card in the glove box and on floral paper. And this floral paper had bits of stems and leaves inside of it as well. So when they say floral paper, it's like paper that goes around flowers. So typically the flowers will have like roses and baby breath, like was kind of found in her car. And then they'll be surrounded with a paper that's known as floral paper, and then like a plastic cellophane around that. Adnan's palm print was found on the back cover of that big map book. And 2 pages were ripped out of that map book. And it ended up that those 2 pages happened to be showing the location of Leakin Park. And the prosecution really pointed this out a lot, that they said, listen, Adnan's palm print is on the back of this map book. 2 pages were ripped out, and these 2 pages were showing, Leakin Park, where Hae's body was found. So this must mean that he did this, that he ripped these papers out. And a lot of people have put some heavy stock into this. They think it's suspicious, but to be fair, I personally don't. Not because his fingerprints weren't on those specific pages, because allegedly, Jay said he was wearing gloves, but because the torn out map pages, they show far more than Leakin Park. They also showed the whole area around where Hae lived. So to me, it's more likely that she ripped those pages out herself because she was referring to them far more than the other pages in the map book, and she didn't want to keep flipping through the book to find them. So that's what it seems like to me more than anything. I'm not sure why he would rip those pages out. And, Jay didn't say at any point that Adnan was referring to a map in order to get to Leakin Park. It kind of made it seem like in all of Jay's versions of events that Adnan was like driving around randomly looking for a place to leave Hae's car and looking for a place to bury Hae's body. So I just don't think it's as significant as the prosecution made it seem.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for the most part, anything found in that vehicle that comes back to Adnan, you document it, you make note of it, but you can't hang your hat on it because he's been in that vehicle multiple times. He could have a reasonable explanation as to why he was touching that book, why he was touching other things. The only thing that I've heard so far, as far as inventory from the vehicle that's of interest to me, is the 2 hairs that were found but did not match Adnan or Jay Wilde's. I'm assuming they didn't match Hae Min Lee either. You didn't mention that, but I'm assuming they didn't match her as well.
They don't say. I'm sure they didn't match her.
I'd like to think.
Yeah.
But even them not matching, unless the hairs came back to someone who had no explanation as to why their hair fibers would have been found in that vehicle, it kind of falls in the same vein as Adnan. If Jay or anybody, Stephanie, whoever the hairs belong to, if they're from someone who had been in that car in the past, it's really difficult to say when those hairs got there. And I also wonder with the hairs, I'm not an expert in this, but with hairs, you usually need some form of flesh from the scalp to be attached to it in order to actually get a full DNA profile from it. It's not technically from the hair itself, it's from the skin attached to it. But I do know with the advances in DNA technology, they now have what's referred to as mitochondrial DNA testing, where they can extract DNA from the hair fibers. So back in the day, they couldn't when this was first done. So I wonder if that has been resubmitted for testing to use the hair fibers themselves if the flesh had not been attached to it. But those are questions I think only the internal offices would have at this point if that's been done in recent years.
Yeah, we went pretty deep into the whole like hair DNA thing during the Kaylee Anthony case, if you
Yeah.
remember.
Yep.
And in that situation, in that case, they had compared banding on the hair as well. You know, there's certain banding that happens on hair that you can see certain things. Has this hair been treated, dyed, etc., stuff like that. So there's ways that they can sort of narrow it down. You know, if
Yeah.
this hair has been bleached and Adnan does not have bleached hair, it's not his hair. So they can sort of eliminate people based on that. But yeah, I think especially in 1999, those hairs were pretty like pointless for them.
Yeah. So that was the only thing of interest in there that could be something. As far as the blood, that could be sign of struggle, but it could also be just one of another occasions where Hae cut herself in the car or cut herself at work or at school, you know, during training, lacrosse practice, whatever. So I would expect a lot more blood if it was this crazy assault that took place in the vehicle. And from what I've read about when they found her body, it doesn't sound like she was beaten and would have serious injury. She didn't have serious injury. So
she did have blunt force trauma to her head, but yeah.
No cuts.
No, I don't think the blood even came from any attack that happened in the car. In fact, if I was to theorize, there was also a box of sanitary pads found in the car. She may have had her period, and they did fingerprint that box, so it did seem like maybe that box was newer. They said it was pretty much full, but it was kind of like in a place where she was reaching for it easily. So she may have had her period. You know, she may have gotten her period unexpectedly, and these things happen. So that could be
one more
it.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing before we move on about the shoes. If it was confirmed that those were in fact the shoes that she was wearing, whether it was through other students or whatever the case may be, let's just take it for right now that those were the shoes. They were able to determine those were the shoes she was wearing on the day of her incident. I do think that could be significant because it does give a little bit more credence to the idea that that the assault did at some point start in the vehicle, because the shoes maybe during the struggle get kicked off, thrown off, whatever it might be, and the offender left the shoes behind even though they removed Hae from the vehicle. So it would be unlikely that if they had taken Hae's body out to Leakin Park, the burial site, they wouldn't remove her shoes and put them back in the vehicle. They just were never on her body when they brought her in there. So it could be something where if she had been taken to a secondary location, someone's apartment, someone's house, I guess they could have taken the shoes out of there so it wasn't linked back to them and threw them in the back of the car. But I also think that it'd be more convincing to me that there might have been something that had taken place in the vehicle, and that's how the shoes came off in the first place.
Yeah, and remember, Jay had told the police during his first interview that Hae did not have shoes on when he saw her in the trunk at first. And, you know, when they asked, like, where were her shoes, he said that Adnan had left them in the car. So he was right on that point.
Yeah, a lot of guilt knowledge. We can definitely dive into that more tonight. I'm sure we're going to. But just taking out Jay's statement, just looking at the evidence that's presented to us in the vehicle, if she had gotten out of the vehicle, was walking around with someone in Leakin Park, or had been transferred somewhere else, you would expect those shoes to probably never be found again, because I think you had said in last episode, or maybe it was one of the earlier episodes, things like her pager were never recovered, correct? So
her pager was never found. Her car keys were never found. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's items that the offender made sure were not with her body or in the vehicle because they could be incriminating it. The keys, maybe just because they were holding them. The pager, definitely. I almost tweeted the other day, man, how much I would pay to have Hae's pager, even now, because they could probably get that thing started back up and see the call log, the call history on it. What other pages might have came in that day. But the shoes, in the same kind of mentality, if the offender took the time to get rid of the pager in a different location so it wouldn't be found with her body or with their vehicle, you would think they would do that with the shoes as well if they were concerned about DNA, whatever it might be. So again, speculative, but it seems to me like the most reasonable explanation would be that for some reason the shoes came off in the vehicle while she was there as well.
It just blows my mind that in these early days, the police decided, like, yeah, we should definitely not get a record of Hae's pager, you know?
I don't think you could.
Oh, I feel like you definitely could. Of course you could, because they have to, like, charge you somehow, right?
I was trying to think of that. because I had a pager just like you, and I was trying to think if it was like a mobile service where it had like a call history of your pages. You might be right. You might be right, because I sometimes make the mistake on here, and you guys are quick to call me out, where my mentality is today's technology. I did it with Lacey Peterson, right? Like certain things and certain ways we do things now that weren't done then. And maybe that was done. I don't know. I mean, you would think that would have came out in court. Maybe there was nothing significant in that call log, but that's something that you say where I would be absolutely shocked and embarrassed if you told me definitively that they were able to get her call record based on the service she had, whatever it might be, and they didn't. They did all these other things, but they wouldn't go get the call records for her pager. I know that you're saying there's no evidence of it, but if we knew for a fact that hadn't been done, I would probably crawl under my desk right now.
Well, listen, I'm looking it up. And some people are like, hey, no, there is no way to get pager records. Yeah. It's a monthly fee. They don't charge like per page or number. But then somebody else said that they found an instance in 2002, where the police subpoenaed pager records, but this was like one of those SkyTel two-way pagers. So SkyTel kept records of messages because they were more like texts. So maybe there wasn't a way to get pager numbers or like to get the records. And I'm not sure, maybe the person knew that. You know what I mean?
Or maybe they didn't know that, and that's why they took the pager, right? Like maybe they thought, shit, they're going to be able to track this somehow. If they have the pager itself, they can use the serial code or whatever. So if I had to guess, that pager is in a million pieces in a body of water or buried in the woods somewhere right now. That pager is never going to be found. It's long gone, because it could indicate a window where if there's another person involved, if it's not Adnan, if it's not Jay, or if it is Jay, where he might have paged Hae, or Adnan might have paged Hae like at 1 o'clock, it could incriminate multiple people significantly. So yeah, that pager is never going to be found again. It's unfortunately, if we do find it, it's going to be small fragments of it.
And here's something else. So the police definitely did subpoena the subscriber information for Jen Pusateri's pager. They did this on February 27th. So I don't know why they would have done that with her pager if they didn't feel they could get some useful information from it. And I found another article that talks about privacy laws prohibit paging services from turning over data to police voluntarily, but law enforcement, I guess in years after 1999, started subpoenaing pager records very heavily. So I'm not sure why they would do that if there wasn't useful information to get. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't look like they did it for her pager because...
Right. And the question is why?
Why? Yeah. Maybe they didn't know she had one. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. I'm going to go with it probably wasn't available for that particular service, whatever she was using, because I think the web sleuths out there would be putting that all over the internet, whether it's going to favor Adnan or be against, it would be out there for our consumption. Before we continue, we're getting to that point. We're about 25 minutes in. Let's take our first break. We'll be right back.
I want you to think about your favorite bra right now. What do you love about it? Chances are it isn't even anything the bra does. It's more about what the bra doesn't do. It doesn't dig into your shoulders. It doesn't show through your shirt or make your chest look lumpy and weird. It doesn't have these weird gaps. Same thing goes with panties. You probably reach for the ones that don't ride up, the ones that look flattering and feel great. Your bra and underwear should make your outfit better, not worse, and that is what's so great about Bare Necessities. Bare Necessities is the biggest online intimate apparel retailer, offering over 140 of the best brands all in one place. They put fit and comfort above all else, so they're all about size and inclusivity, offering band sizes 28 to 58, cup sizes AA to O, and sizes from extra small to 5XL. With so many bra options, finding the right bra bra isn't always so simple, so Bare Necessities offers a few things to make the shopping experience a breeze, such as a bra finder fit quiz that points you in the right direction with just a few clicks, and Bare Necessities also has a team of bra fit experts available on hand to help you find your perfect bra. This is what I love the most about Bare Necessities. I tried it, and it is just as easy and just as accurate as going to a high-end store or a boutique store where they actually measure you in person. Personally, for me, I find it to be much easier because I've always felt really awkward standing like half naked in a fitting room with a stranger who's wrapping a measuring tape around me. So I like that I can do this myself virtually. With Bare Necessities, you get the same personalized experience without having to leave your home. You can give them a call or start a live chat to get your personalized and complimentary fitting. Bare Necessities has been getting feedback from customers for over 20 years. They know what people love, hate, and need in their bras and lingerie, and that's why they started their own brand, Bare by Bare Necessities. And really, I was so happy with my experience from start to finish. The fitting was so easy, so helpful. The bra is a perfect fit, which I'm sure you can agree is not something you always say about, getting a bra. But you shouldn't just take my word for it. I encourage you to check Bare Necessities out for yourself, and Derek is going to tell you how.
That's right. Right now, get 20% off your Bare Necessities order when you go to barenecessities.com and use our code CrimeWeekly20. That's CrimeWeekly20 at barenecessities.com to get 20% off. One more time, barenecessities.com, code CrimeWeekly20. Some exclusions apply.
All right, so we're back. Now let's touch on two items in Hae's car that were of interest to me. So there was that heart pendant that they found with the price tag still on it. And to me, that means it was fairly new. And this had probably been given to Hae as a present, which would also explain the empty gift box also found in the car in the glove compartment. Or maybe that heart pendant was meant for someone else. Maybe it was a gift to Stephanie McPherson from her boyfriend, Jay. In one of his many interviews, I believe it was the second interview, which we're going to talk about today, Jay mentioned that he had bought a birthday present for Stephanie. He said he had purchased her a bracelet. He actually said a charm bracelet. And this is a little heart charm that they're finding in Hae's car. So let's go over the possibilities. Personally, I find it odd that flowers would be in the car if they hadn't been purchased by Hae or given to Hae that same day, right? Otherwise, I feel like the flowers would be dead because of lack of water, and it was cold. This was January. So who would put flowers that somebody gave them in the car and then leave them there and let them die? And the police don't describe the state of the flowers, but they do say they're roses and there's baby breath. So obviously these flowers were intact enough for the police to recognize what they were. These were fairly new flowers. That's what I'm taking from it.
That's possible. I'll also say as far as the charm, would be pretty quick and easy to confirm whether or not Jay, who said that he bought a charm for Stephanie.
No, he said he bought a charm bracelet, but right, you think it would be pretty easy to verify this, right?
Yeah. Just ask Stephanie, did he ever give it to you?
Now, don't ask me, right? Don't ask me if the police ever looked into the purchase or credit card history of Hae, Adnan, or Jay to see if any of them had purchased flowers or a heart charm, right? Because if they did that, if they looked into these records, or if they asked Stephanie about the bracelet, or if they did any of this, I could find no record of it, which is incredibly problematic to me because you've got these two things that I think go together. You've got this pendant, or this little heart charm in Hae's car that still has a price tag on it. You've got flowers in the back seat that I think look pretty new, so it looks like somebody's giving her gifts of some kind. And then you have Jay, I believe it was a week after they went through her car, telling them in his second interview, yeah, I bought a bracelet for my girlfriend Stephanie, a charm bracelet. And they're not going to put two and two together or ask. So here's what I'm thinking. If Jay's responsible for Hae's death, maybe he used the excuse of shopping for a present for Stephanie to bring Hae to him. Maybe he said he needed help picking something out, or he told Hae he just wanted to show her what he'd gotten for Stephanie to get Hae's green light on the present. Because remember, Hae and Stephanie were good friends. But if that's the case, why would he leave all of those things in the car, especially if he'd purchased them and they would track back to him?
Yeah, he took the pager out. He took the keys out, but doesn't take the items that actually belong to him. That's that's tough. I'm putting my tongue on the table here, so to speak, because I could get it chopped off, but I have to say it. I again would, based on some of the things the police did as far as fingerprinting and some of the extent they went to kind of check things out. I said it last episode. I can't say it enough. Some of the things like confirming purchases, things like that, especially items found in the vehicle, it's not even like an advanced investigative tactic. It's like, hey, we have these items in the car. We have to account for all of them. It's like anybody could do it. A person who watches this podcast would know, like, hey, every item in here is a clue. Let's kind of like find all those out. So I feel I'm going to say it. I'm going to put my career on the line here and say, regardless of how horrible this investigation was conducted, things like this were done. And my guess would be they weren't significant, which is why they weren't brought up by the defense and also why they weren't brought up by the prosecution. It was probably confirmed that Hae purchased these items, because if there was something there that suggested Jay was the sole offender of this, because what you're saying is fascinating. Like, hey, he said he bought this piece of jewelry. There was a jewelry piece found in the car with the box. If I'm the defense, if they didn't figure out who this belonged to definitively, I'm bringing that up. That's reasonable doubt to me, because it sounds very compelling what you're saying. Now, there might be people listening or watching this right now going, Derek, they never did. I was there. I saw it. I saw the full report. But I would think the reason this was never brought up by anybody else, defense or prosecution, was because it was probably a nothing burger. Basically, it just came back to whether it was her buying it for herself, her cousin, whoever it might have been. And that's why it never became an item of interest.
Yeah, I disagree with you. So
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think pulling or like testing items in the car for DNA would be one of those like basic building block things that you're saying the police would normally do in an investigation? For instance, those black shoes. They were allegedly the shoes she was wearing on the day she was kidnapped and murdered. Do you think the police would have, in their initial investigation, tested the shoes for DNA? Because you know they didn't. They didn't do that until just now. So if they're passing up testing the shoes she was wearing, possibly as she was being murdered, for DNA, do you think they're really tracking down like a heart pendant to see if she bought it?
So it's going to sound like an excuse machine, but I got to say it. I can tell you that there's been investigations where there's multiple items that you need to test for DNA. And even right now, I hate the fact that this is true, but when there's multiple items and it's $3, $4, $7, $10,000 per item to test it, sometimes investigators are faced with the difficult choice of only submitting certain items. I had it happen to me numerous times, and I hate it, which is part of the reason we're doing Criminal Coffee, because some of these pieces of these cases are not solved because the funding is just not there. So I'm not saying that I'm happy about it.
But they were the shoes she was wearing on the day she was murdered, potentially wearing when she was murdered. If that's not an important piece of evidence to test for DNA, then what actually would be?
Well, they tested the hairs. They tested the blood. I don't know what else they tested. They probably did a lot of trace. They probably submitted her skirt. I think they did. They submitted her shirt, because those were items where they might have said, hey, listen, the shoes we're not sure about. They were in the car. Maybe the offender touched it. Maybe she kicked them off before anything happened. But we know, or we believe, that she was dead before she was brought out to the burial site. So the offender had to have had some type of contact with her, where more than likely, if he or she were to have any contact with our victim, it would have been during the transportation of her body. So let's send the shirt, let's send the skirt, let's send her bra, let's send her underwear, let's send her socks, let's send those items, let's send the hairs, let's send the blood. Let's hold off on the shoes for now. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just being devil's advocate, and I'm throwing another scenario out there. In a perfect world, you send every single item, from the tissue paper for the flowers, to the bracelet, to the gift box, to the map, the book map, to any item that can be removed from that vehicle, and maybe swabs of the vehicle itself, the dashboard, the steering wheel, anything. Just submit it all. But I can tell you that the state labs are so behind on these cases where they might not get to it for years. And if you go privately, it's tens of thousands of dollars. I think I've said it before. There was a case I was working where we had an item. I don't think I can say the item because it wasn't publicly released, but it was one item, and I wanted to get it privately tested, and it had a couple hairs on it, and there was like maybe 7 hairs, and it was $3,000 per hair. So because of our budget with the network, we only sent 3 hairs, and I was pissed because I wanted to send all 7. But we only were willing to spend the 12 grand or the 9 grand for 3 hairs. So I was like, how do I choose what hairs to pick? Like, they all look the same to me. What if I pick the 3 hairs that mean nothing and the other hair that solves the case is still sitting in the envelope? I was furious, but that is an element to it. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but it is a reality of investigative work where sometimes police departments have to choose based on the financial resources available.
Okay, I'm with you. I understand.
I'm not saying you agree with it.
I don't. I don't.
I'm not saying you agree with
it,
but that's a reality of what happens behind closed doors.
Oh, I agree that happens behind closed doors, and it's unfortunate. We know that. I don't think that's what happened here in this case. I don't think they tracked down that locket. There was a ton of stuff in her car that they just seemed to sort of be like, okay, here it is, and like put it aside and never talk about it again. And there are police reports basically showing like a lot of the steps that they made. I'm sure there's other steps they made, but they don't talk about this. But let me switch it up on you. Let's say that's true. Let's say it was just complete negligence on their part, right? So I'm with you there. With every little thing that the defense would bring up to try to discredit or create that level of reasonable doubt, with what you just said, seems pretty commonsensical. You have another individual who's providing all this guilt knowledge. He's implicating our client, and yet there's nothing on our client. He's the one telling you that our client said it. But yet this person who's giving you all this pertinent knowledge that nobody would know unless they were actually there is also telling you in an interview that he had bought his girlfriend a piece of jewelry, a bracelet, I think was the exact words you used. You find a bracelet in the car. No, they didn't find a bracelet in the car. They found like a charm. And he said he had bought her, Stephanie, a charm bracelet. A
charm bracelet. So you find a charm in the car. As a defense, I don't need to confirm or track down who that charm belonged to, but I'm definitely going to bring it up at court that, hey, their key witness said that he purchased her a charm bracelet, the same day that Hae allegedly went missing, and they happen to find a charm in the car, and they don't have an answer for how it got there. That sounds a little suspicious to me. So my question to you would be, did the defense bring this up as a possible scenario?
Listen, not during the first trial, but I haven't gone through the entire second trial, and he had a different defense team at that point. They may have, but I also think they were preoccupied with the cell phone records that they were saying weren't legit, and the Asia McClain statement, the alibi that was provided that, they went back and forth with her on. So I think they were focused on like these big picture issues, trying to get this second trial to go Adnan's way. And I don't think that they were overly concerned. And like his legal team was a shit show. To be honest, we aren't there yet. But his first lawyer defended him badly. She overlooked a lot of things. Then the second lawyer is coming in. They've got to like put stuff together. It is very possible that this was overlooked by the defense team because they aren't going to be looking that deep into these things. But let's go on. I know it's terrible, but I mean, let's go on and say like maybe this isn't Jay and the charm bracelet. Let's say maybe this is Adnan who's responsible for Hae's death. Maybe it was him who purchased the charm and the flowers. His fingerprints were on floral paper found in her car. We can assume that the floral paper goes around flowers, and there were bits of greenery found in that paper, so the flowers must have been a fairly new addition to the interior of the car. Like I said, unless these flowers were withered and dead and had been in the car since the time period that Hae and Adnan were going strong, and, he would have been purchasing her flowers because she was his girlfriend at the time, it is suspicious to me that his fingerprints are on floral paper. Unless, the floral paper found in the car was completely separate from the actual flowers found in the car, which means that the floral paper was possibly from a different bouquet of flowers that Adnan had given Hae months prior, and they just still had like stems and stuff in them. I don't know, but
He did give her flowers at school that one day. If you remember, he gave her a rose. So
yeah. But would it still be there like a year later?
maybe not a year later, but like you said, I'm sure he had given her flowers after that, and it seems like Hae didn't clean out the car very often, as many teenagers do, and it could be from a previous experience. Seems like she had a lot of junk and just old stuff in there. So
yeah, agreed. It could be older paper that was just kind of in there from another bouquet of flowers that he had given her.
The car's tough, especially when one of your persons of interest is someone who had a right to that vehicle pretty freely. Like they could have been in the trunk. They're all over the car. Someone like Jay, if Jay can prove just even once he had been in the vehicle, well, that's going to hurt you. So the only time that would really be an X factor is if, let's say, Alonzo Sellers, he becomes your main person of interest. He says, I've never met Hae Min Lee. I don't know her. I don't know what her vehicle looks like. And then you're going through, and instead of it being Adnan, it's Alonzo Sellers' palm print on that map book. Well, guess what, Alonzo? Get a lawyer, buddy. So that's where it becomes significant, when it comes back to someone who has no reasonable explanation as to how it got into the vehicle or should be in the vehicle.
So you said earlier, like you're just saying now, Adnan and Hae were dating. And then even after they weren't dating, they were still friends, best friends.
Right.
And, she still gave him a ride. So he's consistently going to be in her car. And we understand that his fingerprints are going to be there. But honestly, I would have expected his fingerprints to have been there in a lot of different places. It seemed like the places his fingerprints were kind of places you wouldn't expect them to be, or he wouldn't have expected them to be, like on an insurance card or on the back of a map book or on like an envelope in the trunk. It didn't seem like they were kind of all over the place as you would expect if somebody was in the car a lot. So it almost made me wonder, did he wipe the car down that day, or did he wear gloves that day and that's why his fingerprints aren't all over the place? Because you would kind of expect his fingerprints to be like on the door and on the window and all over like normal parts of the car that you're not worried about your fingerprints being, because you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, that's possible as well. And one thing you said, and I don't think you mean anything by it, and people are going to go, oh yeah, Derek, here, well, we know what you think. You had said like, oh, Adnan and Hae Min Lee were best friends at the time of her death. You know what? I'm saying, I know you're just saying that's because what statements are out there. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not giving anything away here. I don't know if they necessarily were best friends at the time of her death. I feel like certain things that we've discussed, as far as her calling her teacher, being like, hey, don't tell Adnan I'm on the phone with you, is maybe an indication that the relationship might have been starting to teeter one end over the other. I think Hae was really into Don, and I think they were friends. I absolutely think they were close, but I think the relationship had definitely changed. And I'm only saying that because it is going to be part of my whole rationale as I'm going forward. I do think the relationship wasn't as perfect as some would want you to believe.
So I tend to agree with you, and I think that this is a very high school thing, staying friends after breaking up. We all thought we were.
Can I ask you about that?
No,
because I don't agree with that. That's why I want your personal experience, because I can tell you that I've been broken up with. I've had my heart broken, and the girl doesn't want you anymore. And the last thing I want to do is remain her friend, especially if she's dating someone else and that guy's the reason she left me. I'm not talking to that girl ever again. I'm never going to even look her direction. So I wanted to ask you, is that normal? Because you and I are very close in age. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I can remember from my own personal experience, if I had a bad breakup where the girl was choosing another man over me, and let's just call it what it is, she was starting to write Don in the book when she was still dating Adnan. So she definitely had wandering eyes, and I'm assuming Adnan, who was very in tune with it, probably picked up on that, probably put two and two together based on how soon after she started to have a relationship with Don, that Don might be the reason why it was happening. And so to continue that relationship like nothing happened and just to regress back into the friend zone, that's not an option for me personally. And so I wonder, did that actually happen? Or was Adnan doing that in the hope that he could win her back? Or was that even the case at all? Or was it one-sided? So What is your memory of how breakups like that would end between two people who were dating and are now not dating?
Yeah, like I said, it's very high school. That's what people did in high school. And it was, I think they were trying to be like, oh, I'm above it all, and I think there was an aspect of like, yeah, I'm going to be not bothered and hopefully this person will look my way again. Like they'll realize, what they're missing out on, blah, blah, blah. And it's such a weird microcosm, high school, because you're like all shoved in there together like every day. It's kind of like a reality show. So, sometimes you do end up cycling back and dating that person again. So there is hope there that you would remain friends and remain on their good side. But I feel like once you get out into the real world and you become like, in an adult relationship, yeah, there's no need to remain friends with an ex, especially if there were some strong feelings there, because it's going to be very difficult in the aftermath to like be around that person. Maybe down the line, I just don't, for me personally, like when I'm done with you, I'm done with you,
Listen, I'm telling you guys right now, if for my ex-girlfriends from high school and stuff, we can weigh down in the comments. When we ended, if you broke up with me, you're dead. You're dead to me. I don't know you anymore. Don't talk to me. Don't ask me for a pencil. Don't ask me for a ride. Ask your new boyfriend for a ride because I'm not available.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
so
like that.
So that's what, when I first met my husband, like I was friends with a lot of my exes, but I had broken up with them. So the fact that they wanted to remain friends, to me, it was like cool, because it was like, now I still have somebody to call if I need like my IKEA furniture put together, and I have this like person there, several people. And my husband was like, guys don't remain friends with girls that they've dated because they just want to be your friend. Like they're hoping that you will like have sex with them again. And I was like,
Agreed,
no. I was like, no, but who knows? I think some guys are probably genuinely just want to be friends. I don't know.
If you dump me for another guy, good luck to you. Hope it works out.
So yeah, now as an adult, I'm kind of like over that. Once I'm done, I'm done. And if we're not together, I don't really have a lot of friends anyways. I don't need any friends. So I definitely don't need exes as friends. But yeah, I think that this was a high school thing, so I believe that they wanted it to appear as if they were still friends. But the amount of passion that they had between them, which you can tell, I mean, this kid's leaving his house, driving over to her house, sitting outside her basement window, talking to her through the window for hours, like in the middle of the night. This was a very strong bond. As it is when you're young, and everything's so serious and so intense. So to go from that to just like buddies, I don't see it being a thing that's possible, especially that quickly. But I think they wanted to try and make it work.
Yeah, defying your parents, going against their wishes. I mean, there's a lot they're going against in order to be together. So they were really, there were strong feelings there, without a doubt.
So, okay, we said maybe it could be, Adnan. I was also looking, and like if Adnan was the one driving Hae's car on January 13th, which Jay claims Adnan was driving around Hae's car and Jay was driving around Adnan's car, right? You would expect his fingerprints to be on the steering wheel in a lot more places unless he was wearing gloves or unless he wiped the car down. But now let's look at the flowers and the heart pendant and the gift box as maybe being something that Hae purchased. Maybe there were presents for her friend Stephanie, whose birthday it was that day. And maybe that was why Hae had told Adnan she couldn't give him a ride home before going to pick up her cousin, because she realized it was Stephanie's birthday. When they were talking about it during lunch, they were talking about that stuffed reindeer that Adnan had left on Stephanie's desk, and Hae wanted to, grab some presents for Stephanie before going into work that night. There was also a happy birthday crown found in the back seat, which might support that theory. But the heart pendant, it still had the price tag on it, and the price was $119.95, which seems kind of steep for a teenage girl to pay for a present for a friend. But, maybe not. Hae was working. She had her own money. That still seems like a lot. I did see some stuff online, too, saying, this was right after Christmas. Maybe it had been purchased before Christmas when they have, like, those huge sales for the holidays. Maybe it was, like, 30% off or 40% off or something. I don't know. But basically, who knows what that heart pendant was, the flowers, the happy birthday crown, all of that stuff. It's never really clarified. But I do want to point out none of Jay Wilde's fingerprints were found in Hae's car, which does make sense with his version of the story because, like I said, according to him, he and Hae were not close friends. They didn't really hang out. And Adnan was the one driving Hae's car that night while Jay was driving Adnan's car. So I don't know. I don't know what to say.
The only explanation would be, again, Jay has said that Adnan told him he was wearing gloves, and that could also mean Jay was wearing gloves, and that's how he knew that his prints wouldn't be found in the car. And that's why he said, oh yeah, Adnan was wearing gloves, so you're not going to find anything, because in reality, he's just talking as if it's Adnan when really it's him. That's if you're in that camp, that's what you're going to believe. I think it goes down to how much premeditation you think went into this event, whether it was Jay, whether it was Adnan, whether it was someone else. We're part 5 here, so we can start saying some things.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I feel like this was a combination of maybe some thought about it in the past, but more a crime of passion in the moment when it happened, where it happened, how it happened. So that, to me, is more likely that you're going to have mistakes like trace DNA, fingerprints, things like that, because although the thought went through your head when it happened, it was just because you got to a point where this person, and really put yourself in this mindset, they're in the car with her, they're having a discussion, and something said that triggers the person. So they grab her by the throat. And as they're doing it, they're realizing, oh my God, look what I'm doing. She's going to tell people my life is over. And as they're thinking about it, they're still squeezing. And then they realize, oh my God, I can't let her tell anyone. And before you know it, because she wasn't expecting it, it's a minute or two later and she's dead, because it would not take long. That seems more likely than having a scenario like this, where whoever did it had this whole plan structured out ahead of time and it was carried out this way. I think the burial site would have already been dug. Things like that would have already been taken care of if that were the case. So for me, if you're operating under the belief that this was at some level a crime of passion and happened in the moment, you would expect to find whoever was the offender, their fingerprints or DNA in the vehicle. The fact that you have no fingerprints from Jay and no trace DNA from Jay either means he's like a highly trained criminal and a professional, or it could also mean he was never in the car.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't feel very spur of the moment to me. It kind of does feel a little bit more premeditated. And I'm not going to say it was well planned out. I mean, either way you look at it, you've got teenagers who are responsible for this, whether you think it's Jay or Adnan. So I wouldn't say it's well planned out, but the fact that there was so little physical evidence found in that car where allegedly this murder happened kind of lets me know that some planning went into it, that whoever weaseled their way into Hae's car that day knew what they were planning to do once they got there.
If it's an outside party or Jay, I agree with you. If it's Adnan, then there's a ton of physical evidence in the car. You know what I mean?
Not really, because his fingerprints aren't on the steering wheel. They're not on the door.
He wasn't driving the car. Oh, you're saying after he was driving the car, but he could have at that point put gloves on.
But then he brought gloves, so he clearly planned to need gloves for some reason.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, his fingerprints on the map, like you said, the insurance card, things like that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. That you wouldn't think to wipe down if you were like, I got to get my prints out of this car.
Yeah,
right?
you would but you could have your hand on the steering wheel with no gloves and simply take a sanitizing wipe that's in the car, or take your t-shirt and just wipe down the steering wheel like you see in the movies.
Yeah.
And you're good. You're solid. Yeah. So if it was Adnan, he does have fingerprints and palm prints in areas like the flour, tissue paper, the glove box, things where why are you going in her glove box? Why are you in there? I mean, I guess it could be a boyfriend thing, but overall, if we knew for certain it was him, then all of those fingerprints and palm prints that you're finding, you go, wow, yeah, it's pretty clear he was in that car that day. And I'll also say, although Adnan's fingerprints being in the car are not significant because he has the right to be there, he's been in and out of the car, I will also say that if he hadn't been in the car recently, you would expect some of those fingerprints, because it's basically the oil from your skin that's sitting on a surface. It would deteriorate over time based on weather, based on conditions. So those fingerprints, they could be from within a week or so, maybe a couple weeks. I don't know the exact number. Don't lock me down to it, but they're relatively recent. That's what I will say. Doesn't mean they happened that day. And the car wasn't found until how long after her disappearance?
45, 46 days.
45, 46 days. So just off that, we know that Adnan hadn't been in that vehicle more than likely in almost 2 months. So the fingerprints can last a while if they're not disturbed. But if the vehicle is being used and he had touched the book months prior, if other people had touched it, it might destroy those fingerprint ridges that you have from the oil that collected on the book itself. So those are things to consider, but nothing in here makes me say, wow, that's a smoking gun, especially when it comes to Adnan.
Yeah, and it was a partial palm print on the book. I don't know if that matters.
Yeah, I mean, the palm print, though, it's still significant. Palm print's just as good as a fingerprint. Sometimes that's all we get.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want anybody to come at us and be like, oh, there wasn't fingerprints, it was a palm print. And,
no, hey, listen,
like we know.
If you want to take anything from this whole block that we just did, the moral of the story is that the prints from Adnan don't really mean much considering the fact that he had the right to be there. If you're leaning that it's Jay, unless he did a really good cleanup, this hurts your case. If you're leaning that it's someone else, completely unidentified, you'd expect to find those unidentified prints in the car. I haven't heard much about prints that were located but weren't matched to anybody. So that hurts that theory as well.
Well, there allegedly were like a bunch of prints in the car, but we don't hear really anymore about that.
But I'm glad you brought it up so I don't put my foot in the mouth. If there's this bunch of prints that no one was able to identify, match to friends, cancel out based on law enforcement officials that were in the vehicle, that as well is significant. But I do think you make a great point. I know we talked about it. I think the charm with the tag still on it, significant, something that should have been explored. And then also the flower paper, like you said, how old was it? Things like that. Would love to have access to that. Would love to know more about it. But we were really focusing a lot so far on Adnan and Jay because of the testimony from Jay. And I don't think anything in this block regarding the evidence in the vehicle makes me lean one way or the other or feel like there's something in there that could have really knocked it out of the park as far as getting them convicted or getting them off. I think the defense should have definitely brought that up and said, hey, you have one of your people here saying they bought a charm bracelet, and there's a charm in the car. Hello? Let's take a break. We're going to go to a break. We'll be right back.
People always say it's about the journey, not the destination, and they're right. Getting there effortlessly is what base luggage and bags were made for, because traveling can be stressful and confusing, so Base is there for your journey, whatever your next destination might be. Base was created by actress Shay Mitchell to make sleek and affordable bags, luggage, and accessories designed to help you travel effortlessly while still looking fashionable and put together. Base has thought of everything you could ever want in a piece of luggage: 360-degree gliding wheels, a cushioned handle, built-in weight indicator, washable bags for your dirty clothes, and all the interior pockets you need to keep organized. I always say this, that built-in weight indicator really comes in handy for me. I always overpack. And I'm always afraid when I get up to the airport desk and they tell me my bag's too heavy. But I really do love the 360-degree gliding wheels as well. It makes traveling a little heavier, which I always do, much easier. The luggage comes in multiple sizes and colors, and they have the weekender bag, which can be used for shorter trips, and it's super functional. They even have a separate place in the bag to store your shoes separate from your clothes so that nothing's getting dirty. Every piece is made to look better with miles, so you don't have to worry about it in the cargo or overhead, and Base has already gotten over 30,000 5-star reviews. I really do love my Base luggage. It looks good, so I like the way it looks. I like the way it functions. It helps me pack smart and get through security easy and quick. So if you're looking for great luggage, we think Base should be at the top of your list, and Derek's going to tell you how you can get a great deal right now.
Yep, right now Base is offering our listeners 15% off your first purchase by visiting basetravel.com/crimeweekly. Just go to basetravel.com/crimeweekly for 15% off your first purchase. That's BEIS travel.com/crimeweekly.
Okay, so there's also a lot of talk about where and how Hae's car was found. So people usually, in Adnan's camp, the pro-Adnan people, they've inspected the pictures of the car and they've noted how lush and green the grass underneath it is. And they said, they don't believe that it would have looked like that if the car had been parked there for 45 days. So the suggestion is that the car was moved, whether by a suspect or by law enforcement trying to control the narrative. Now, remember that Hae's keys have never been found. So in order for this theory to fly, you'd have to assume that somebody still had Hae's keys at some point after her death and before the car was found, at some point in that like month and a half, or the cops were able to find Hae's keys and they just didn't tell anybody, and then they were moving the car around to sort of make Jay's story work so that they could get Adnan for murder. So just keep that in mind.
I hope the picture is up right now. I do hear what people are saying. You can see the picture for yourself. We're not manipulating it. You can see how the grass is a little greener around the trunk area of the rear of the vehicle, but it does look like there's a dead spot that goes under the vehicle a little bit on the driver's side. I will say, just to be fair, there's a black vehicle parked on the passenger side of Hae's vehicle, and it's pretty dead. It's pretty brown around that, not like it looks under her car. It could be something. I'll concede that. But it could also be the way the sun comes down, the way it hits. I'm not a lawn expert. I don't know. But when I first heard you say this a couple episodes ago, I was expecting it to be like this perfect like area where like there was grass literally right down the tire tracks where you could see that, oh no, clearly this was a green spot that this car was pulled over. I would just like to point out that if you're not seeing this on YouTube, it does appear to me that on the driver's side, at least, because I can't really see the passenger side, that there is some dead grass going under the vehicle, under the tires, that may suggest that maybe this spot kind of grew in differently. But that's where I'm at on that. I don't think it's as significant as some people have made it out to be.
So you said you're not a lawn expert, right?
I'm not a lawn expert. That's clear. I don't even deal with my own chemicals for my lawn. So you could say something that would make me feel otherwise, and I wouldn't have anything to disseminate anything different than what you're saying.
So, I mean, very few people are lawn experts, but there are lawn experts, actually.
Of course there are. Got one in my house. He's great. Shout out to Josh.
So they actually consulted. So, HBO did that like mini series of the Adnan Syed and Hae Min Lee case. They did that like a mini series. And so they consulted with a man named Eric H. Irvin, who was an expert in turf grass. He's actually a turf physiologist, which is crazy that they exist. So they consulted. HBO went up to this guy and they were like, hey, we think this car was moved and we want you to prove it. So Eric Irvin visited the grassy lot in June of 2018, and then he identified the main species of grass in that area. And there's a bunch of them. There was perennial ryegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, white clover, broadleaf plantain, prostrate knotweed, common Bermuda grass, and Dallas grass. So he dug up samples of each type of grass and he grew them in trays in a growth chamber at the University of Delaware under low light at the average high and low temperatures for each day that Hae's car would have been parked in that grassy lot. It's actually incredible.
That's cool.
It's very cool. It's cool because he had to look up like the weather and the weather conditions and like what time the sun rose and set on each day and sort of replicate that in the lab. It's so cool. So you guys can read this article actually, but it's on gcmonline.com. But in this article, Irvin says, quote, "The idea was to get an initial determination of how many days the identified species would remain green. The photo indicates an abundance of green grass under the trunk area of the victim's car, but only brown grass beneath the black car next to it. The black car had been at that spot for far longer than 46 days." Which I think is something people overlook. That black
car could have been there for years.
Yeah, that black car wasn't just there for the same amount of time as Hae's car or less amount of time. It was there for far longer. So if the grass under the Sentra, which was Hae's car, turned brown in less than 46 days, this would provide evidence that the car had been moved to that location sometime after the day of the murder, which would contradict a key witness statement and the prosecution theory that Syed had parked the car in the lot on the day of the murder. End quote. So Eric Irvin, he had to sign an NDA and stuff. I don't know why he can talk about it now, but he basically told us that the results and his conclusions that were not what the HBO filmmakers were looking for, because the filmmakers at HBO, they pretty much wanted proof that Hae's car had been moved. That was the narrative that they were spinning, which if you've seen this series, you'll know that that's absolutely true. There's always a a bias. There's always a narrative. There's always like something the filmmakers are trying to make you feel and think and believe. And this was what they were trying to do. And so he said basically his experiment that he did, the simulation, it didn't really give proof that Hae's car had been moved. He said he found that all the cool season species remained mostly green for the full 46 days, while the warm season species turned brown. So that's why you do see some brown under her car, but some of that towards the back of the trunk is still green. And it also has a lot to do with how cold it was that during that time. I mean, it was January, and it also has to do with the fact that that part of the grass was shaded, so the sun wasn't hitting it as much. Things like that. There's a lot of factors. But,
moisture, rain, all those things too.
Yeah. And I mean, he did say, he was like, yeah, like I guess, it could have been moved, but there's nothing definitive in my simulation of my experience that show it was. So like anything's possible, but it is very possible that that grass just stayed green for 46 days. And it could have done that. And those cooler weather species of grass did stay green for 46 days in his simulation. So there you have it.
I think a more like specific example that would suggest, yeah, definitely something's different is if like the area around Hae's car had been recently cut, and under her car it was like 4 feet long, or vice versa, where it was just a complete opposite as far as how long the grass was. But it seems like all the grass, whether it's under the black vehicle, the red one, or Hae's car, it's all pretty consistent in the cut, which then it gets down to the coloration of the grass, which goes back to what they were just saying. Different cars there for different lengths of time, different exposure to sun or lack of sun based on how long the vehicle's there would obviously contribute to how the grass dies or how it grows. In the winter and the colder months, grass tends to grow down into the soil to hibernate. I don't even know if that's the right word for grass, but to kind of stay alive, and then it'll come back up as the weather gets warmer. So for people, I don't think this was like a big thing, but I did see it by some people like, hey, this is something to think about. But I will say, and I'll say it numerous times going forward.
It was a big thing for some people, man.
For some people.
A big thing for some people, man.
Yeah, and I will say, it is something to point out. And then when you start to chain things together, like the grass, like the charm, like the phone record where Adnan's phone made a rec call to Jen, all these things individually are not something that's like, oh, exculpatory. But if you chain enough things together, you create something called reasonable doubt. And that, my friends, is what a defense team does. It's not just one thing. They'll throw 30 things at you. You may not even believe in 5 or 10 of the things they bring out. They don't need to convince you of that. They only need one. But more of them together makes it even stronger. So things like this, in and of itself, maybe not much, but tack that on to everything else you have. And that's why you have millions of people out there who believe that Adnan's innocent. And to be frankly honest with you, they're not really wrong. There is a lot in this case that is questionable. And so that's why it's not like this outlier group of like 10 people who think he's innocent. It's a lot of people. And so there's some reasonable justification behind that.
I don't think it's necessarily they think he's innocent. I think it's they think he should never have been put on trial for this.
I agree. That's even a bigger group, right? That's even a bigger group. But there is, I mean, I've seen it in our comments. There's also a group that definitely thinks Adnan had nothing to do with this. He's just completely innocent guilty by association and being around and not having a good alibi for that time in question. But we will get there.
Yeah, that makes him incredibly unlucky, like we said last time. Like the dude's got to like get
worst
a
luck in the world,
clover.
Man.
He's got to go get like his,
seance,
aura purified, exorcise those demons, because that's like a lot, man. Because even us looking at this right now, objectively, we can't say like, oh yeah, we absolutely have no idea why this kid was arrested or why he went to trial, because there's things that don't make sense, and not having an alibi is a pretty big deal. I'm sorry, but it has.
Having an alibi, fingerprints in the car, calls the night before, some history of maybe some tough times between you and Hae as far as with the teacher, things like that. You possibly saying to a friend, I'm going to kill her, the day before, the day of. These things are problems.
I mean, being possessive, being a little stalkery, stuff like that. Like, once again, just like with the reasonable doubt thing, the more you have, the more reasonable doubty it becomes, right? The more of these other things that just don't add up you have, the more like suspicious it becomes. So it's just like you got to stack those things up next to each other and see which tower is bigger. And, I think that the reasonable doubt tower would probably be bigger, but it doesn't mean that the suspicious tower isn't big too.
No. And we forgot even him saying, hey, I was back at school by 11 and there's this concrete proof, if you take the teacher at their word and their documentation, that he wasn't in class. He showed up for almost 40 minutes late.
And
That's
him saying
not
he was
good.
at track practice and nobody being able to confirm that. And his father saying he was at mosque all night and him making calls all through the time where he would be at mosque during evening prayer and wouldn't
there's
be
a
able to
lot.
make calls. There's a lot. So basically, after they took the car in and started processing it, the police went to Adnan's home on Johnny Cake Road. They took him into custody and they began interviewing him. The two detectives Ritz and McGillivray, were most likely hoping to get a confession from Adnan during his initial interview. And I think, let's be honest, most police probably are hoping that in the interview, when they have the suspect, the person will just say, yes, I did it, you caught me. And then, it makes everybody's job easier, less paperwork, less footwork, less investigation. And, so they said things to scare him. They were like, we're going to find your red gloves and we're already going through your home and your car and we're going to find something to tie you to Hae's murder. But Adnan insisted that he had no idea what they were talking about. Police also took and processed Adnan's Honda Accord, and they took soil and vegetation samples from his car, although they don't make it clear in the police reports if they took samples from the interior of the car and the trunk as well as the tires. So it definitely looks like they took samples from the interior of the car because they talk about vacuuming stuff up, but they don't ever mention specifically taking soil or vegetation samples from the tires. But they did say that no soil or vegetation found in Adnan's car matched the area where Hae's body had been left. I assume they either took samples from the tires and found them to be negative, or they didn't take samples from the tires and we don't know what that soil and vegetation looked like, because I feel like if they had taken samples from the tires and the soil matched Leakin Park, we for sure would have heard about it. It would have been a huge deal in the prosecution's case. And, that would be kind of evidence, especially considering Rabia said Adnan didn't even know where Leakin Park was. So I think that do you think that they took soil samples from the tires? Like they had to have, right?
I mean, based on your argument earlier, they didn't do a lot of things they should have done. So you're kind of defending them now. But yeah, I mean, I would assume so. But
it feels like that's the thing you would do.
Yeah.
Right?
And even if they did find soil, though, in the car, in the tires that matched Leakin Park, it still can be interpreted a different way. It can still be interpreted as Jay was driving Adnan's car at some point through there.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you think about it, there's a road that goes through Leakin Park, and Jay said they parked on the road and then walked into the park. So if you're parked on the road, you're not going to have like soil and stuff like that in the car. But you would think if you were digging in the dirt and then you got back into the car, you might leave some soil and dirt in the car that would be picked up.
If they vacuumed it, the person vacuumed their car out afterwards, they're riding on the road for 40 days. They're going through different piles of snow and muck and debris, and it would diminish the amount of soil left behind in the tires. They're rubber tires, there wouldn't be much there. Microscopic amounts at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so like their reports at least are very half-assed, because I just have all these questions that are not answered, and it's frustrating to think that they might never be. But in the front passenger seat, they found one wrestling glove and they found a white envelope. And in the glove compartment, they found an envelope with passport photos of Adnan inside. So, you have to have like a certain photo when you're going to get a passport. So it wasn't an actual passport, it was passport photos. They also found some jeans in the back seat that had stains on them, but these were tested for blood. They came back negative. At his house, police collected several articles of clothing and footwear. In the basement, they recovered a pair of suede ramrod boots. And in the bedroom of Adnan's middle brother, they took a pair of dark brown Timberland boots. In Adnan's bedroom, they found a psychology textbook with pictures of Adnan and Hae inside, as well as several greeting cards. And this is also where they found that note. Remember the one Hae had written Adnan where he said like, where she was like, oh, you got to get over this. And then Adnan and Asia had passed it back and forth during class and they were writing on it. And then Adnan had written at the top, I'm going to kill, without finishing that sentence.
Allegedly, Adnan wrote that, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess.
Hey, listen, you always get me on that one. So I'm allegedly, because he's always said he did not write that, correct?
He said he doesn't remember writing it, but he doesn't remember shit about that day. So can I really like,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it's convenient. Criminals, if they are guilty, have a tendency to not remember much of the day in question. That is something that happens. May not be the case here. Like we said, Adnan might be a really unlucky guy with a case of selective amnesia. But, you know, these are things, and I'm not saying it because some of you can see my face. I'm not saying it to make light of it. But there are certain things that I think, like the words being "I'm going to kill" on a card, like that is not good, considering what we're talking about here over these last 5 episodes. It's not a good thing to see, and it's not something you would normally expect to see. We talk about teenagers and the way they act a little different than we do as adults. This is something that's still very uncommon, I think, even for teenagers to be writing anywhere. I don't think that's something that I've ever seen during my days in high school where people are writing things like that. Now, maybe Adnan didn't write it, but again, considering the circumstances we're under, if he didn't, what a thing to have written on something that you in your possession when you're being questioned about a murder of your girlfriend.
Very unlucky.
Especially, I mean, the greeting card, like you said, just to confirm, the greeting card was from Hae.
It wasn't a greeting card. It was like a note, you know, where she was
going back and forth about Hae.
Well, no, it was from her initially. Remember, she had written it to him and she was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Like, you need to get over this. And then
not good.
And then Adnan and Asia had passed it around and they were writing like things on it. Like, remember, Hae was pregnant and she wasn't at the field trip and things like that. So
you got me now. Yeah, not good. Not good. Not something that's a smoking gun, but just like we talk about.
It's in the suspicious tower.
Yeah, suspicious tower. Just like we talk about a bunch of evidence that would create a level of reasonable doubt, there's also, like you said, the suspicious tower where there's a bunch of things individually, not something that you can write your whole case on, but you add them up. It's called circumstantial evidence. And there are cases where if you have enough circumstantial evidence, you can have a guilty conviction, right? So this is something just like the circumstantial evidence that says he's not guilty. These are things that you wouldn't expect to find in a teen boy's room when it's a note about a girlfriend that was recently killed and she broke up with him shortly before her murder.
Yeah, very unlucky, like I said.
Not good.
Yeah. So Adnan actually waived his Miranda rights at 7:55 a.m. on February 28th, 1999, and the police went on to interrogate him for the next 6 hours. At no time did he confess, but the police also did not record or videotape this interview, which I find to be problematic because they did record the interviews with Jay. I find it to be problematic that a 17-year-old was allowed to waive his Miranda rights without being able to consult a parent or a lawyer. I actually am really deep into this with another case, a very similar thing where a 16-year-old was accused of killing an adult, and this 16-year-old went in and waived their Miranda rights and then just basically like said a bunch of incriminating things. And the mother was like, well, that shouldn't have been allowed to happen. Like, he's underage, he's a minor. And the police were like, well, because he was being charged or he was suspected of, being a murderer, it didn't matter. And I don't know if that's like a thing, but as far as I'm concerned, if you're under the age of 18, you don't know what you're doing. You have no idea that you have certain rights, like you have the right to a lawyer and you have the right to not talk to a police. And for you to waive those rights on your own without having the counsel of an adult who will be able to give you good advice, I think it's really gross on behalf of the police, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where we always made it a practice if you were a juvenile to have a parent present to sign off and wait, and allow you to speak to them and give permission to speak with your child. I do think there are circumstances where if there's a sense of urgency because of the case where someone's life might be at risk, where you can ask questions now and make the justification for it later. But in this particular case, because at this point it had been a long time since anything had come from this case, it would have been the best practice to get the parents' permission. Although I will say, I believe, unless you tell me otherwise, this interview, although it was not recorded, which I completely agree with you, stupid, should have been, whatever was said during that interview, it was allowed to be admitted into court, even though there wasn't much there. So whatever the law is, it obviously passed that threshold so that it was admissible in court, right? Unless you're telling me it was thrown out.
I mean, I guess.
Or
Yeah.
or there was nothing significant in there, so ultimately it wasn't necessary, and they never presented anything in court. If you didn't admit to anything, then yeah, I mean it's a lot of nothing for 6 hours.
Yeah, he didn't confess. He just kept saying like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And apparently there was an attorney who'd been called on Adnan's behalf. And this attorney had been trying to get to Adnan for hours. He was like calling the police, and he showed up, and I guess the police wouldn't let him see Adnan, and they didn't even tell Adnan that he had a lawyer there waiting to like intercede on his behalf. So that's also problematic.
Yep.
It's pretty gross. Once again, like, I understand that the police are legally allowed to lie to you, but to me, these are basic human rights: the right to an attorney, the right to, be a kid and not know what the hell you're talking about, and be able to have somebody there who can guide you. And these rights were completely denied him, and I don't like it personally.
Yeah, well, this is outside the scope of trickery. You can't, if the lawyer's present, if the lawyer is there, or the person being interviewed states at any point they want their lawyer present, questioning immediately has to stop. So the only, I guess we would call it, loophole here would be if Adnan waived his rights to an attorney lawfully, and a lawyer decides to show up in the lobby and say, I want to speak to Adnan. Law enforcement doesn't have to let them speak to him. Do you get what I'm saying?
Well,
I'm
that's pretty much what happened, right?
Yeah,
he waived his rights at 7:55 a.m. and then the lawyer showed up on behalf of him, and then the police. But that's like dirty, man. It's grimy.
It's the dirty tactic. It's a dirty tactic. I can't say I haven't seen it before. But it is within the confines of the law, and it's something where if Adnan is legally allowed to waive his right, they don't have to. If they're trying to get this kid for murder, this lawyer is going to come in there. They know what the lawyer is going to do. They're going to tell him to stop talking. So do I think the police officers knew what they were doing in that moment, and it's a slimy move? Yeah, of course they did. So it's one of those things where I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys and say it doesn't happen. Now, if Adnan had said, I want my attorney present, and they were just sitting there waiting, and the attorney showed up, and they're still just not bringing him in because they're hoping Adnan changes his mind because he's fatigued or nervous or whatever the case may be, and maybe Adnan will reinitiate the conversation with them. At that point, it can be considered a waiver of your client attorney privileges. Maybe that would be wrong. But if Adnan waived his rights and he's sitting in there talking to him freely, and the lawyer's in the lobby saying, hey, or a phone call, not even in the lobby, but a phone call, do I think they probably said, yeah, we'll get back to you, and they hung up the phone? Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think you're wrong at all. I'm not going to sit here and say you are.
He's 17 years old. He doesn't know enough to know to be able to waive his rights. That's the whole point. He's under the age of 18. He's a juvenile. He's not allowed to waive his own rights. I don't look at.
Can I be a jerk here? Can I be a jerk here? I'm going to be a jerk. The only thing I'll say is he's a 17-year-old guy. And immediately when he turns 18, he knows the difference between whether he has the right to an attorney or not. I think.
Yeah. According to your law, if it's legal for, the police to lie to you, and if it's legal for the police to get a 17-year-old to waive his rights and then have a lawyer there ready to talk to him and help him, and for them to completely say like, no, you can't do that. You said it's grimy, but it's legal. Then yeah, like that's the law. At 18, apparently you overnight know what you're doing, and at 17 you don't. I don't agree with it, but I don't agree with the other part of the law that we were just talking about with the whole lawyer thing. But he already waived his rights, so they're not going to let them, let him talk to his lawyer. Like, I don't agree with either of those things necessarily, but if we're going to follow one, we got to follow the other.
I guess I would have to know more about this, because this is my understanding, a 17-year-old cannot waive his or her rights. That's what I thought too.
That's what I thought too. And literally, I'm dealing with the same thing in another case, which I believe happened in Iowa. And I
Yeah.
looked it up and I searched and it basically says like, no, they can't. But the way that the prosecution in this other case made it seem is they were like, well, because of the severity of the crime he's being charged with, none of this matters. He can waive his own rights.
Well, I think at court he could be treated as an adult. He could be tried as an adult. The only thing I think would be an exception is, and not to be redundant, is if there's a missing person where they believe this 17-year-old abducted this child and the child's still alive in a shed somewhere, the preservation of life becomes more important than their rights. So they're going to get him in there and say, hey, where is she? Where is he right now? We need to know. But this isn't one of those cases. So what I'm thinking is the reason this wasn't a bigger deal because there was nothing said during that interview that hurt Adnan's case. If he had said during that interview, yes, I did it, I think you would have an issue of admissibility, and it would have been something that would have been contested where defense would have said he was under the age of 18. Anything he said during that interview that was incriminating, it's inadmissible in a court of law, and they would have won. But I feel like we're talking about it because you want to bring everything up, and I'm acknowledging that it's a slimy move or whatever, all that good stuff. But ultimately, there was nothing said during that interview that was significant, and therefore it became kind of a moot point in a bigger case that defense was concentrating on other things as far as police conduct and how they carried the investigation out.
All right. So even though he didn't confess to anything during that 6-hour interrogation, Adnan Syed was charged with the murder of Hae Min Lee and booked that night.
Police now reveal that 18-year-old Hae Min Lee died of strangulation and that they discovered her 1998 Nissan Sentra a short distance from where her killer attempted to bury her body in a shallow grave in Leakin Park. Key details they had withheld as they sought out a suspect. They now have one in custody.
He's identified as a 17-year-old Woodlawn student. His name is Adnan Syed.
News of Syed's arrest is met with disbelief by the Muslim community in Woodlawn.
It's impossible. He cannot do it. He's such a nice, sweet child. He cannot do it. He's mosque going, praying all the time. He cannot do it.
He's a sensitive guy. He's gentle. He has no kind of delinquency record. He's not violent. He's just a kid. He's a baby. He's like my little brother.
The Chaudhrys believe public pressure on police to break the case has landed the wrong person behind bars. But police suggest the suspect had a motive in the form of a fatal attraction to his victim.
According to investigators, Miss Lee and the suspect, Mr. Syed, had started a friendship back in May of 1998, and at some point after that, Miss Lee decided to wanted to break the relationship off, didn't want to go any further with it.
So from that clip, we do have an answer to a question that a lot of you had from last week's episode. Had the cause of death of Hae Min Lee been made publicly available at the time that Jay initially spoke to the police and told them that Adnan had strangled her? And the answer to that is no. This was not revealed until after Adnan's arrest. So Jay either knew this information because he had been there and or been involved, or the police told Jay how Hae had died before he began his interview, and that was how he knew. But that doesn't really work either, because then I went back to Jen Pusateri's interview and I read through that again, and she says towards the end that Jay told her that Adnan strangled Hae, and this was before Jay spoke to the police. So it does seem like this was guilt knowledge that Jay just happened to have, because this was not revealed to the public until after Adnan was arrested.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to weigh in on that as well. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Sleep is a tricky thing, and for a long time I was getting too little of it, and the quality of my sleep was terrible. So I was really struggling to make it through each day, and that's when I was much younger than I am right now. And, it was rough because even then I knew there wouldn't be relief at the end of any hard day because my mattress was so uncomfortable I would just toss and turn all night. But climbing onto my Helix sleep mattress at night has been a game changer. I so look forward to getting in bed now. And even on those nights when I don't get as much sleep as I want, I know the quality of my sleep is going to be great. Helix Sleep is a premium mattress brand that provides tailored mattresses based on your unique sleep preferences. The Helix lineup includes 14 unique mattresses, including a collection of luxury models, a mattress for big and tall sleepers, and even a mattress made just for kids. Helix knows that there is no better way to test out a new mattress than by sleeping on it in your own home, and that's why they offer a 100-night risk-free trial. You can sleep on the mattress, see how your body adjusts, and if you decide it's not for you, you'll get a full refund, no questions asked, and they're going to ship the mattress to your house free of charge. It's so easy to set up yourself. It comes in a box. You just open it up, let the mattress unfurl, and go at it. Everybody's unique and everyone sleeps differently, so all you have to do is take the Helix Sleep Quiz and find out your perfect mattress and what it is in under 2 minutes. Helix has several different models to choose from, each designed for specific sleep positions and feel preferences, like models with memory foam layers to provide optimal pressure relief if you sleep on your side, which I do, and models with more responsive foam to cradle your body for essential support in stomach and back sleeping positions. They even have enhanced cooling features to keep you from overheating at night. Now, when I took the sleep quiz, I was matched with the Midnight Lux mattress. I've been sleeping on it for, I think, 3 years now, and it's just amazing right now. It's as amazing as it was as the first day I got it. And you don't have to take our word for it. Helix has over 12,000 5-star reviews, and they've been awarded the #1 mattress picked by GQ and Wired magazine. It's even recommended by multiple leading chiropractors and doctors of sleep medicine as a go-to solution for improving your sleep. We here at Crime Weekly love Helix. We think you will too. Derek's going to tell you how you can check them out for yourselves.
Yep, love my Midnight Lux. We think you guys would definitely like Helix as well. And right now, Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Just go to helixsleep.com/crimeweekly. With Helix, better sleep starts now. All right, so we're back from break, and I agree with everything you said. You know, I know there's people out there that want to believe that the police fed Jay this information to strengthen his statement. And there are things that Jay knew, like the strangulation, before he ever spoke to police, right? And more importantly, there was a vehicle, Hae's vehicle, that had not been found yet. So even the police didn't know where the car was until after they spoke to Jay. So either Jay was the first person to give them that information, or they knew where the car was the whole time and said, hey, let's just keep it here. We'll wait till we get someone who comes in. We'll tell them where the car is, and they can tell us, so we can kind of get this ball rolling. Just think about that. Say it out loud to yourself, and you tell me if that makes sense.
I don't think it does make sense.
No, of course not. Oh, they found the car. Police drove by. There's Hae's car. But let's pretend we don't see it. Let's wait until we go to Jen. Jen leads us to Jay. Then we'll have Jay say it so we can get the guy that we really want, which is Adnan. I'm not trying to be condescending here when I say that. That's what some people want us to believe as we're researching this. Again, let me repeat this because it's significant. Jay told the police where the car was. The police didn't tell Jay. They didn't have the car yet. And like Stephanie said before the break, Jay had told Jen before he was ever spoken to by police that Adnan had strangled Hae. Now, you could make the argument that he's lying about Adnan and Jay did it himself, but to make the argument that Jay was fed all of this information from police, I'm just telling you now, I'm off that train. I don't believe it. I didn't believe it when it was said initially because of these factors, and even more so now. That's not pro-law enforcement. That's just pro-common sense.
So I believe that law enforcement did guide him in his second and third interviews to sort of make his story fit more with the timeline, with what the cell phone records said. I will say that.
I buy that as well, by the way. I buy that as well.
I don't think before they interviewed him for like an hour, they were like, okay, Jay, here's what you're going to say when the tape recorder comes on. You're going to say Hae was strangled, and you're going to say that Adnan brought her to Leakin Park. And Jay's like, what's Leakin Park? Don't worry about that, kid. Just say it. Just say it. Here, I'll write it down for you if you need help remembering. You know, I don't believe that happened.
And by the way, the car's over here too. We need to know where that is.
Yeah, we found the car, man, like 3 weeks ago, but we've just been waiting for someone like you to come in and be the messenger of this information. So we're going to need you to, pretend you led us to the car. Like, it just would cross every legal, moral, ethical, professional boundary, every single line. And there would be too many people who would have to be on board for it and who would have
including Jay.
Yeah, including Jay, who at any time now could have turned around and been like, you guys, I'm so sorry about what happened to Adnan. It was the police's fault.
He would get paid millions for that, by the way.
Oh my God. He would be able to write he wouldn't be able to write a book, but he'd have a ghostwriter write him a book. He'd be interviewed on every news channel. Jay Wilds would be a hero who finally came clean about the conspiracy of the police against Adnan Syed. So why hasn't that happened? because it didn't happen.
He could make the argument, you could make the argument that it hasn't happened because Jay's like, shit, I just got away with murder. I'm not saying nothing. But that being the case, I don't believe that happened. Yeah. He's like, well, if they want to go with Adnan, sure. Yeah, it's Adnan, whatever you guys say. But to be fair, I agree with everything you said. I think there were definitely things that were coming up during the interview where it's like, that timestamp doesn't work, Jay. You sure it wasn't a couple hours earlier or something like that? And it's wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And doing that weakens the whole case. And it also probably makes Jay question what he's thinking. You should have let him stay with his original statement, even if it was wrong, because I would rather have certain timestamps wrong, but have them be consistent over multiple testimonies, as opposed to him now thinking, well, what did I tell the police? I know what I thought, but what did I tell the police? Because they kind of told me that might not be right, or they made comments that made me think it was wrong. So I changed what I said because I felt like I was saying it wrong. And now I don't remember what I originally said. Just let the person say what they feel. Not everything's going to be right. No one expects them to be perfect with times, but at least their story, regardless of how many times they're asked about it, will be the same. That's more important.
Yeah, and in my opinion, honestly, I've gone through all of his interviews multiple times. In my opinion, it's Jay leading the police. All right, it's Jay feeding the police information, and then the police, maybe they did sort of already by that point have a strong feeling towards Adnan. So he was just like providing them the confirmation bias that they wanted and that they needed. Who knows? But in my opinion, he's feeding them the information that I believe he already knows because he was involved. Yeah. And they're eating it up very quickly. And he's like, oh, shit, like they'll believe anything. So he's changing his story constantly. And they do kind of push back a little bit in the second and third interview, but they never really say like, you're clearly lying here. What are you hiding? Like, what is your involvement more than you've said? Because you're lying. They never really get like aggressive with him or like, pushy with him. They kind of are incredibly patient and they question him, but they question him to bring him back on track. They don't question him to like actually dig deeper into what his involvement is, in my opinion.
They don't want him to clam up. He's giving them the whole case on a platter. The last thing they want him to do is be like, wait, you guys think it might be me? Yeah. I'm not saying anything else. Figure it out on your own. So you have a guy walk in and he's giving you a case that frankly at that point they had not solved at all. They couldn't even find the fucking car. The car, yeah. So, and it was in their town, was it not?
Yeah, and I mean like we had talked about a couple episodes ago, it looked like somebody had scanned the car. Like some police had scanned the car, most likely driving by it, but because it had never been put into the system as a car that was attached to a missing person, it didn't flag it or pop up.
Yeah, this was a golden nugget put in their lap. They were like, hey, we're not going to screw this up because we're in no way, shape, or form close to solving this case. So we got a chance now.
So Jay actually sat down for his second interview with the police on March 15th, 1999. So this is about 2 weeks after his first interview and 2 weeks after the arrest of Adnan Syed. So this time, Jay begins his story with the morning of January 12th, saying it was his birthday, and he went shopping with an ex-friend of his, and he is referring to Adnan. He said they went to Walmart, which was right across the street. So they left Adnan's car at Jay's house and walked over, and then they shopped and they picked up some things. During this shopping trip, Jay said he brought up his girlfriend Stephanie and how her birthday was the following day, and that led to him and Adnan talking about relationships, and that's when Adnan said he was going to kill that bitch, referring to Hae Min Lee. Jay said, quote, he told me that she had broke his heart. That was extremely wrong for anyone to treat him that way. He couldn't believe how she stood and looked him face to face and told him she didn't love him and could be that heartless. And he told me, he said almost jokingly, I think I'm going to kill her. Yeah, I think I'm going to kill her. End quote. Jay claims the whole reason Adnan wanted to see him that day was to enlist his help with the disposal of Hae's body. And Jay said that Adnan had told him the way he was going to do it, and he was going to tell Hae that his car had broken down and he needed a ride, and then he would kill her in her car. Jay said that Adnan dropped him back home and returned to school. And that's important because remember, Jay said they walked to Walmart and left Adnan's car in the parking lot. But now Jay's saying Adnan dropped him back off at home and then went to school. So these are small inconsistencies that could mean something or nothing. It could mean he's making everything up. But in this version of the story, we have Adnan telling Jay the day before, the morning before, that he's going to kill Hae, and he wants Jay's help to do it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not good that he's lying. And I will say that one explanation for this could be police manipulating the story to be more in line with what they believe happened. But I'll tell you another scenario. If you're to believe that Adnan's involved and that Jay was told this information, maybe Jay's not just kind of the innocent bystander where he's listening and kind of surprised that he's saying this, but maybe Jay's egging him on. Hey man, that's messed up what she did. Listen, I'm not going to kill her, but if you do this, I got your back. I'll help you any way I can. I'll help you get rid of it. I know some people. I've seen some things. I've been around some people who've done stuff like this. You're my boy. I got your back. Whatever you need. If you go through with this, I got you. Maybe not even thinking he's actually going to do it, but just trying to act like a tough guy, like a hardened criminal. And so I feel like Jay knows this, and Jay's maybe not only was more of a contributor to the conversation, but may have actually empowered Adnan to feel like he could get away with it because he was going to help him. So I have no proof of that, but that would be a possible explanation as why Jay can't get his story straight on a few different things, because the truth is Jay was actually encouraging him to do it by saying, hey, whatever you need, I'm there for you. And in fact, I can't remember the name, but you had said in a previous episode that that's exactly what Jay had told one of Adnan's friends, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So not too far off from what could be a reality where Jay was a lot more involved than he wants people to believe. And that's why he can't get his story straight when it comes to little things like this, because he absolutely is lying because he's trying not to incriminate himself any more than he already has.
Yeah, I totally see that. And I totally understand what you mean, too, because let's say you spent 3 hours doing something. And let's say you went on a shopping spree at a store during those 3 hours and you come home and your husband's like, what did you do today? And you're like, well, I went to Starbucks and then I walked at the park. And then you get to the shopping spree part and you're like, I ain't telling this motherfucker I just spent like $400 at the store, right? So now you're all like caught up and you're like, well, and then, I went to Target and I saw a dog and then I left and it was raining, but it wasn't raining. And then you get all like messed up because you're trying to like tell a story that's mostly true, but you get to like a rough patch where you got to suddenly make something up on the fly. And it's not really a good kind of, like cohesive story because half of it is not true. So I completely understand what you mean. And I think that's very plausible. He did seem like that type, they all kind of seem like they thought they were hard and he's a drug dealer and he said he was the criminal element of Woodlawn High School and he kind of saw himself that way, right?
And this isn't us just pulling out of a thin air. Allegedly, Jay said this to someone else. So it's not like this revelation that we're pulling out of our asses. It was allegedly, it was said by Jay directly to someone. So how would we not take that to be significant and a possibility as far as what really transpired between these two the day before and the day of?
Absolutely. And so Jay's saying like, okay, we went to Walmart. Adnan brought me back home, even though they walked. Adnan goes back to school. And then Jay paged his friend, Jen Pusateri, and he said they went to Gelston Park with her dog. And it was there and then that Jay told Jen about what Adnan had said during their shopping trip, which is a completely different story than he told before, right? So he said later that night he went to Champs to celebrate his birthday. He returned home around 10 p.m., at which point he received a call from Adnan, which once again, we do have a call from Adnan to Jay on the evening of the 12th, but that call happened at 9:18 p.m. So if Jay got home at 10, he would not have been home for that call. And that call lasted only 18 seconds. What is being said here? Adnan's like, Jay, it's me. I'll be there in the morning. It's going down tomorrow, and hangs up. What is happening in 18 seconds? So at first I was wondering like if maybe Adnan had called and left a message for Jay, and then Jay called him back when he got home, and he sort of like just rolled those two things into one and said he talked to Adnan when he got home. But there's only one incoming call to Adnan after that 9:18 p.m. call. It happened at 9:32 p.m., which means Jay would still not be home if he said he didn't get home until 10, and that call only lasted 28 seconds. So before I go on, I do want to mention that like in this story that Jay tells, Jen is basically like an accomplice or an accessory at this point, because he's told her like, yo, Adnan just brought me to Walmart and we made a plan to kill his girlfriend, like it's going down. And Jen is supposedly knew about this on the 12th when Hae is obviously still alive, and she doesn't tell anybody and she doesn't do anything to stop it. So if that's the true story, if that's the true version of events, this is a problem for Jen. And maybe that's why her story is kind of like not super reliable either.
Yeah, I agree. If someone's saying, well, Jay's saying this happened, which incriminates him to a certain degree because he knew about it and didn't tell police. Well, if he told this to Jen's sitting there with her lawyers and her parents. She knows that this isn't good for her. So could she have omitted that fact? Yeah, I mean, she's human. Of course she could have.
And remember, she said when the police came to her house, she went to the video store and said to Jay, like, yo, the police are at my house. Like, what am I going to do? And he said, tell them what happened. Tell them whatever happened that doesn't get you in trouble. That was like the specific wording that he had used. So it's possible.
I wouldn't be surprised. We talk about teenagers and stuff. This absolutely could have happened. 100% could go down exactly the way Jay's saying it, where he was telling Jen and maybe she didn't think it was real. Mm-hmm. And obviously she's having some guilt after the fact, thinking, oh my God, I could be charged with a crime here. At minimum, people are going to hate me because I could have prevented it. Yes. I'm not going to say that I knew that. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why she would lie to law enforcement. And if she knows the only other person who can dispute what she's not saying is Jay. Mm-hmm. So good luck. It's literally a he said, she said.
Yeah, this whole case is a he said, she said.
Facts. Yeah, true.
So I would also like to point out that while Adnan was making all of these phone calls late at night on January 12th, he was not home. So remember, this is the night he called Hae 3 times. He had to talk to her. He had to give her his new cell phone number. He was apparently driving around. It looks as if he was home until around 11 p.m. Then his calls ping at different locations. Towers that were not the normal ones his phone would ping off of if he was home. So for instance, the calls to Nisha at 11:05 p.m. and to Krista at 11:07 p.m., they pinged off of tower L651C, which is the tower that does cover Adnan's house. But when he calls Hae at 11:27 p.m., the call pings at tower L608C, which is basically all the way across town, and it's not really like close to anything. I zoomed in. It looks like there's like a kind of shopping area. There's a bunch of stores, Home Depot, Chick-fil-A, Panda Express. I suppose the adult video store where Jay worked would fall under that tower, but according to Jay, he was home at this time and not at work. So maybe Adnan was just driving around. When Adnan called Hae again just after midnight on the 13th, he was near the L602C tower. That tower is in downtown Baltimore. And then when he calls and talks to Hae at 12:35 a.m., his phone pinged tower L654A, which looks like it's close to both Jay and Jen's houses. So from all things that I can see, he was probably just driving around. At this point, he doesn't have a place that he's going. I was wondering, maybe was he like following Hae or going to her house and trying to like see if she was home? But he doesn't go close to Hae's house, at least not at any point when these calls are coming in. But my question is, like, did he sneak out, like he used to do when he would go over to Hae's and they'd talk all night through her window? It seemed like with a family so strict, they wouldn't like Adnan driving around, at midnight on the phone when he had school the next morning. It seems like he was kind of up to his old tricks again. And I'm just not sure why he would feel the need to be driving around and making phone calls instead of being home, especially because it doesn't seem like there was any place that he had to be.
I definitely agree. He's got school the next morning. Like you said, his family appears to be pretty structured. So I definitely have those same questions as well. What is he out doing at that time of night? I think another question that we got a lot of comments about, because I had hit on it, was in regards to these calls to Hae. And the last one being, as you just said, 12:35 p.m. and 12:35 a.m., I should say. People said that was pretty normal. That was pretty normal for them to talk late at night. And I don't disagree with you guys. But my understanding
when they were dating.
When they were dating, first off, agree with you there. But also, there was a system in place where he would page her, then they would call this number so that her phone wouldn't ring. My interpretation of this is that he was directly calling the house at 11:30 and then at 12:30 in the morning. So when you think about how short the duration of that call was, would you say a minute and 24 seconds or something? It was super short. We always talk about these different scenarios. What could have been said, what's our relationship? Who are you with? All these different things that could have been said by Adnan and Hae. Well, here's another one. Adnan, what are you doing? Why are you calling me still? You're calling my house. My parents are waking up. They're going to hear this. What are you doing? Where were you? What are you doing? Why aren't you picking up the phone? I've been trying to call you. Just, Adnan, I'll talk to you tomorrow. I can't talk right now. Can we please just talk tomorrow? Okay, I want to talk tomorrow. I think I'm going to need a ride. All right, that's fine. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Boom. Call's over. Could be something as simple as that. But from what you've told me and from what we've gathered, there's been no indication that after they broke up, there was a new ritual in place where Adnan had permission to call her house at almost 1 o'clock in the morning when she has siblings, parents, and has school in the morning. That is not normal. So these are all things in totality with the fact that he was driving around that would suggest a pattern of behavior that wasn't necessarily normal for Adnan or for Hae.
So he could have paged her, and because she was already on the phone with Don, their system still stood. But I was almost wondering, the whole driving around at night thing.
But Stephanie, there would have been a record of that. If he had paged her from his cell phone, there would be a record of that.
What if he paged her from his house phone?
It seems to me like the way you explained it, he was out on the road for a while, nowhere near the house, between 11:30 and 12:30. So would he page her and then drive all the way across town to the first spot and then to downtown Ball? If he paged her, he's expecting a call within a couple minutes.
Yeah, good
There would
point.
definitely be a call log of him paging her phone. He was calling the house directly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Without that system in place.
Right. And when she had a pager that he was aware of.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was a sense of urgency for him to get in contact with her. That's my interpretation of it. Only mine, but that's my opinion. He was really trying to get a hold of her immediately.
A sense of urgency and a restlessness, right? This whole driving around thing. Did he get her on the phone and say, I'm out. I got the car. Like, I got free time. Can I stop over?
Out?
We can talk. Yeah, can you hang out?
That's a great point, too. Didn't think of that.
So maybe he's driving around hoping she's free, waiting for her to come home so he can go and see her. And when he finally does get her on the phone, she's like, I'm on the phone with Don. Like, I can't hang out tonight. And he's hurt maybe by that. Who knows?
Or I'm going to bed. Why are you calling me so late? A lot of things. But yeah, you're right. Maybe he was like, I'll come pick you up. We'll hang out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff could have happened here. But I just don't understand why he's driving around at this hour of night and what he's doing. And it just is, if he's not doing anything and he has no plans, it's a restless thing. And according to Jay, this was the night of the day that Adnan told him, I'm going to kill her. And this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell her my car broke down and I needed a ride. So he could have been setting the stage for that already if what Jay is saying is true. But let's continue on with Jay's series of events. He claimed that on the 13th, Adnan showed up at his house around 11 or 11:30 a.m. And that's a 15-minute difference from his first interview, where Jay claims that Adnan got to his house around 11:45 a.m. Jay said that the two of them then drove in Adnan's car to Security Square Mall, which is when Jay went to one of those kiosks in the middle of the mall and he purchased a charm bracelet for his girlfriend, Stephanie. And he and Adnan then discussed the details of Hae's murder. Adnan told Jay that he was going to leave him with his car and his cell phone, and after he had killed Hae, he was going to call Jay and Jay would need to come and pick him up. Jay dropped Adnan at the back of Woodlawn High School between 12:45 and 1:15 p.m. That's a pretty big window and a big change from his first interview where he said he dropped Adnan off at school at 12:30 p.m. After that, he went to Jen Pusateri's house, which was only a 5-minute drive from Woodlawn High School. Once again, Jay claims her brother was home, and they played video games for about half an hour or an hour. But he also says in literally the same breath that Jen wasn't home yet, but she got home around 1:30, which would technically mean she got home very shortly after Jay arrived, depending on whether he dropped Adnan off at school at 12:45 or 1:15 p.m., which once again, that's a big window. That's a half-hour difference. If we're trying to be precise here, we can't be. So Jay also says that he and Jen at some point while they were hanging out at her house, they left in her car, they took a ride, they got some soda, and then in the car, he told Jen again that Adnan was planning to kill Hae, which, once again makes Jen look really bad. Because now in this version, Jen knew that Adnan was going to kill Hae, before it happened, not after it happened, twice before it happened. So Jay said he left Jen's house around 3:40 p.m. because Adnan had called him and said it was time. Well, he hadn't really called him and said it was time. So in this version of events, Jay said that Adnan called the cell phone 3 times while he was at Jen's house. The first time, Adnan was checking to make sure the cell phone was on. The second time, Jay told Adnan he would be there to pick him up. So Jay doesn't really explain this, but apparently it seems like the second time Adnan was calling once again to like make sure everything was okay. And Jay was like in position and Jay was like, yeah, don't worry. Whenever you need me, I'm there to pick you up. And the third conversation was short. Jay couldn't remember what they talked about. Then Adnan called Jay at Jen's house on her home phone number. And this was when he told Jay that he was leaving school, but he still didn't say where he was going or when he needed to get picked up. So keep this in mind. We've got 3 incoming phone calls to Adnan's cell phone that's in Jay's possession while Jay's at Jen's house. And then Adnan called Jen's home number to say, I'm leaving school, basically like he's about to kill Hae. But he still doesn't give Jay any directions of where he's going or when he needs to be picked up. Jay claims that after he left Jen's house and he was halfway between her house and his house, that's when Adnan called again on the cell phone and told Jay to go to the parking lot of Best Buy. Jay said that Adnan told him, that bitch is dead, come and get me, I'm at Best Buy. Okay, so in Jay's first interview, he said Jen got home at 12:45. Now he says she got home at 1:30. Let's look at the call logs from Adnan's cell phone again, which both Adnan and Jay agree was in Jay's possession on this day, the cell phone. There's 3 incoming calls between 12:43 p.m. and 3:15 p.m. And then there is 1 call to Jen's house at 3:21 p.m. Now, this kind of sounds right at first glance. 3 calls from Adnan, and then Adnan called Jen's house to tell Jay he was leaving school. The only problem is Jay had Adnan's cell phone, so Jay would have been the one to make that call to Jen's house. And why would he do that when he was at Jen's house and he didn't leave until 3:40? Now, this is what I think happened. It's possible that he was just trying to make a story fit the cell phone records. And not being an overly, brilliant person, he was looking at the cell phone records. He knew he was looking at Adnan's cell phone records. He saw the call to Jen's house at 3:21, and then he made this claim to just fit, not really putting 2 and 2 together that he had Adnan's cell phone at the time, because he makes these little mistakes a lot. Because this is the first time Jay mentions that Adnan called Jen's house. He does not say that in the first interview. So did the police pull the phone records of Jen's home to see if a call had been made to her house from Woodlawn High School on January 13th between 1 and 3 p.m.? I have no idea. They never said. And I believe by the third interview, this whole Adnan called Jen's house, to let Jay know he was leaving school, that's completely disappeared. It's not even in the scenario anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. So if that's the case, do you think that's because Jay's covering his tracks because he's doing this whole thing by himself, or is Adnan still involved?
That's a tough one. I think he's lying. I think he was lying to make his story fit with the cell phone records. I think that was the most important thing to him. He may have been under the impression, maybe from the police, this is the physical evidence we have. This is basically the footprints of where you were that day. But it's also going to give us an indication of when you and Adnan communicated. So it's very important that everything sort of line up with this. They may have given him that indication. So he was just trying to make things fit. And I'm sure at the end of that interview, the police were like, all right, we're not going to talk about that call to Jen's house anymore, right? Because that couldn't have possibly happened. And it just drops from the story after that. Yeah.
And then it could also be something along the lines of where the cops are saying, while they're interviewing him, well, what about this other call to Jen's house? Who made that call? And they're bringing it up to him, which you don't necessarily want to do because now you're giving them information. But when they're asking you a question and you're trying to be believable, the last thing you want to say is, I don't know. You don't want to say that because then it's well, what else are you lying about? So when they ask him, hey, they have the paperwork in front of them, they're not showing him. And they're like, well, what about this call that happened at so-and-so time? Where were you at that? What's up with that? Oh, yeah, you know what? Now that you say it, that was a call from Adnan. He called the house. He called Jen's house. That's what it was. My bad. I forgot about that one. And so they're leading him which is also wrong. And you could make the argument they're leading him because they have this nefarious intention to try to manipulate the story, or it could be just bad police work where the interviewer who's interviewing him is committing mistakes that are taught to you when you're learning about interviews and interrogations, things you shouldn't do. You never want to volunteer facts of the case because then you can't confirm whether it's actually information they're aware of or information they're just picking up as you're running your mouth. So there's a big difference.
They may have considered this like the follow-up interview because they'd already interviewed him at length on the 28th, during which they didn't talk about the cell phone records. So now they're talking to him again 2 weeks later.
Yeah, diving into the details.
Yeah, dotting their I's, crossing their T's, trying to make everything gel up. And now they're maybe going through the call logs one by one, like, oh, and who made this call? And who is this incoming call? And do you remember getting call at this time? And so he's just trying to answer because, like you said, he doesn't want to say, I don't know, I don't remember. He doesn't want them to start looking at him like suspiciously, even though they definitely should have been. But I definitely think that call to Jen's house never happened. But what did happen is Jay, who was in possession of Adnan's cell phone at this time, called Jen's house, which means he wasn't there at Jen's house, which means they're both lying about Jay being at Jen's house. And I mean, they're both Jen and Jay. Allegedly they're lying. He may have just been sitting at Jen's house and like, oh, let me just call you on the cell phone really quick. Who knows? But
it also could be Jay wanted to try and remove Jen from the situation as much as possible, where this could have been who knows why they were doing it, but maybe Jen knows more about this than they want us to believe. She might have been more, based on what he's saying, she did know more. So how much her involvement was, we still don't know to this day. I know Jen, from what I understand, did the HBO docuseries and stuff, and she's never been someone who anybody believes she was an actual contributor to Hae Min Lee's death. At least nothing has been said. But ignorance and the not, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, so-and-so is going to kill someone, you do have an ethical responsibility to report it. And so and depending on how you look at that, that might be something Jen doesn't want people, viewing her through that lens of, we wouldn't be sitting here today if you had just done what was right and reported it to your parents or to the police. Hae may still be here.
So Jen's involvement to me is a wild card, and I think it's something we're probably never going to know. What I think is indisputable, at least in my opinion, is Jay was not at Jen's house at this time period that he said he was. And I think that's going to be proved when we talk about these 3 incoming calls in a minute, which Jay claims he received while he was at Jen's house. But let's take a quick break, our last break, before we dive into that. The leaves are falling and back to life feels are kicking in. Think of fresh starts, new routines, and jam-packed to-do lists. Whether you're running the kids to sports or dance or gymnastics, or you're checking homework, or, you have a million other things going on, the relaxed days of summer are definitely over. But Daily Harvest will keep you going with easy-to-prep food built on organic ingredients that you can actually feel good about consuming. Daily Harvest delivers delicious harvest bowls, soups, flatbreads, snacks, smoothies, lattes, and so much more, all built on organic fruits and vegetables. And Daily Harvest works directly with farmers to source the best of the best ingredients. They freeze their ingredients at peak ripeness to lock in nutrients and flavors, and they never use artificial preservatives or artificial ingredients. Everything stays fresh in your freezer until you're ready to enjoy it, which helps you reduce food waste at home. The food from Daily Harvest is all very easy to prep, so I never have to worry about what's for breakfast or lunch or a quick and healthy midday or even late night snack, because I have been known to like a late night snack. And I love their smoothies. I have at least one every day because they taste so good. Even the kids love them. So when the kids love them, they definitely taste good. They're so easy to prepare. I like that I can add my collagen, my protein, whatever powders I'm using at that point, and it's just very easy to help keep my health in check. But as the weather gets colder, I've really been enjoying their soups and their harvest bowls. Specifically, the zucchini and minestrone soup is so nourishing and filling. I love how it warms me up, and it's a perfect early dinner when I'm working in my office. Daily Harvest is also committed to human and planetary health, which means they do their absolute best to ensure transparency and integrity when it comes to their ingredients and the humans who grow them. For instance, by supporting farmers farmers who invest in practices that increase biodiversity and improve soil health, and by delivering food in recyclable and compostable packaging whenever possible, Daily Harvest does all the work for you, so all you have to do is eat and enjoy. We do love Daily Harvest. There's something for everybody, and if you want to check it out for yourself, Derek's going to tell you how.
You deserve one less thing to worry about, so let Daily Harvest take care of the fruits and veggies for you. Go to dailyharvest.com/crimeweekly to get up to $40 off your first box. That's dailyharvest.com/crimeweekly for up to $40 off your first box. One more time, dailyharvest.com/crimeweekly.
All right, so let's look at those 3 incoming calls, which Jay claims were Adnan, and then the call to Jen's house, which was made from Adnan's cell phone, which was in the possession of Jay Wilds. So the 3 incoming calls, they come in when the phone is at different locations each time, which means Jay was on the move, not at Jen's house. When Adnan's cell phone received the incoming call at 12:43 p.m., it pinged off tower L652A. Now, this is in the area where Jay told police in his first interview that he'd met Adnan initially, and Adnan had popped the trunk of Hae's car and shown Jay her body. It's not really close to Jen's house at all. Next incoming call is at 2:36 p.m. That pings off of tower L651B. Now, cell towers have 3 sides, an A side, a B side, and a C side. That's why the tower numbers have a letter after them. The A side of the tower usually is pointing north or northwest. The B side is usually pointing south or southeast, and the C side points west. That puts tower L651B pointing southeast, which is in the vicinity of the highway, so it looks as if Jay was driving at this point. Now, what I have a problem with is on her blog, View from L2, Susan Simpson, who's a lawyer and a host of the Undisclosed podcast, she interprets this tower differently. She interprets this tower as meaning that Jay was in the vicinity of Woodlawn High School, and she says this puts him at the last place that Hae was seen alive before she was killed. But as I understand it, given the cell phone tower locations and their different sides, that wouldn't be the case at all. If the tower pinged L651A, that would be an area that not only included Woodlawn High School, but the Best Buy, where, allegedly Hae's car and her body was. And you could argue that Jay was headed in that direction towards Woodlawn, but you could also argue that he was headed towards the Best Buy, where Adnan and Hae's body allegedly were. So the fact of the matter is, because it kind of the B is pointing southeast, it's not pointing upwards north, which is where Woodlawn and Best Buy were. I don't know how Susan Simpson can say that this puts Jay in the vicinity of Woodlawn High School, because he could have been driving just down the highway at this point. He could have been in the vicinity of many different buildings. And I mean, he was. At that point, he was clearly driving.
Yeah, I think it is a misconception by a lot of people who listen to true crime or just watch true crime shows, where they look at cell phone towers as if you're looking at a map down at it, where the map's below you, and you're looking down at these towers. They're kind of like a sphere, where one person or multiple people who access that tower, regardless of where you are, it's kind of a circle over the top of it, where if you're in that umbrella, it's just one tower. But if you look at cell phone towers, it's more like a pie, which we were talking about off camera, where it's directional. And depending on where you are, based on that tower, it will access a different panel, I'll call it for this terms, where you're using a different panel to transmit that call to and from your phone. So it's not one panel for the whole tower. And that's how we, in the past, doing investigations, have had digital experts like Derek Ellington from Ellington Forensics, who explained this to me exactly. With one of the cases I worked involved something where there was an alleged suspect who was traveling in the general vicinity of our victim, and sure enough, we were able to minimize the other potential areas he could have been by using the specific panels that his phone was bouncing off of. Because just like this case, if it was one sphere, yeah, it could be a ton of different people that we were considering, but because of the direction of which the call was bouncing off that tower, if you will, it minimized the amount of people in our pool that we were pulling from. So I agree with you 100% on this. This isn't really up for debate. This is something anyone can go check. I don't know where they're coming from. They might have an argument for it, and We implore them to respond to this if they want to. They don't, obviously they probably won't, but it's one of those things where I did reach out to Derek Ellington as well, and he talked about it a little bit. So yeah, this is 100% the way these towers work. And I would even say now it's not just ABC. I think there's even more panels now. So it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, because obviously a lot more cell phones, they need more panels. So this is something to consider when we're talking about towers and trying to prove or discredit certain testimonies or beliefs about what the cell phone data represents.
I think it comes down to, what side are you on? And really, in a situation like this, you shouldn't be on a side. You should be on the side of finding the truth. However, we have to understand humans are human. They have biases, they have relationships, and they also, they have things that they believe based on their lived experiences. So what you have here is one data point that can be looked at differently, based on what you believe. So the team at Undisclosed, they're looking at the cell phone tower like, oh, L651 is, the tower that's by Woodlawn High School. And that's true, but it's not the direction that it was pointing at. So if you were against Adnan, you could say, hey, this is Jay driving to Best Buy to meet Adnan because Adnan called him. If you were for Adnan, you could say, hey, this is Jay driving to Woodlawn High School to snatch Hae and murder her. Depending on which camp you're in, which side you're on, you can look at this one data point and this one piece of evidence and interpret it differently. But in my opinion, it's not up for interpretation. It's just, this is what it is. It doesn't show anything besides he was traveling, he was moving, and he wasn't at Jen's house. That's the only thing that it, without a doubt, shows.
I agree. And I'll even go further, and this isn't a knock on us or anybody else. The reality is, I believe you said her name was Susan, right?
Susan, yeah.
I mean, she's a lawyer.
Yes.
She's not an expert in digital forensics. Neither are you. Neither am I.
No.
We're interpreting it all different ways, but the reality is there are people way smarter and that do this every single day, specifically this type of stuff, and are going to be able to shed more light on it. So take what we say, come up to your own analysis, maybe do your own research, and see if you think Stephanie's right. And that I'm right. This is what we believe. We believe that when you're going to start using the cell phone tower data, you have to consider the panel that's being utilized by the person, whether it's a witness, whether it's a potential suspect, whether it's the victim. It's not as just vague as it's that tower, so anywhere around it is in play. That's not our belief. She's pointed it out. Other people believe differently. So I think we have more to talk about with this specific situation, and it might shed some more light for you because I believe you told me earlier there are some experts that weighed in on this, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
we're not going
good.
to talk about that just yet, though.
There is an FBI agent who has an expertise in this, who weighs in on this, and we're going to go over it in detail. So we'll get there, but he is of the same belief as you.
Well, I mean, it's not even the same belief as me. It was made to seem like all of the cell phone data was just garbage. That's how it kind of felt like after the first trial, where, oh, that shouldn't have even been used in the trial. It wasn't accurate. It doesn't mean anything. It's not what you think it is. So basically, like, throw that all out. And in that situation, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater because there are things to learn from the cell phone data. This data isn't just pulled out of thin air. It's not made up. It comes from somewhere. Yes, you can't pinpoint exactly where a person was when the call was made, but you can pinpoint, an area. You can tell if someone's moving. You can tell that Jay's lying and he wasn't at Jen's when these calls came in. You can tell things from the cell phone data, and you shouldn't just throw it all out. And the FBI agent basically said the same thing, and he said this in 2016, so I think it was around the time of Adnan's second trial, where he said, I don't know what the cell phone expert from after the first trial is talking about. Like, this cell phone data is accurate and usable for what it's being used for. It doesn't give exact data, but we never claimed it did, sort of. It's just like a sort of sketch of what was happening that day.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, we'll get to it more. It's fascinating. I love this stuff. I've told you this numerous times, and I feel like when you can't really trust anybody these days. And so when you think about all these witnesses, even Jan or whatever, they all might have an incentive to say things or leave things out. But digital forensics, DNA, trace evidence, they're not rooting for anybody. They're just there to tell you the truth. And if you can interpret the information that you have, it is the most solid. That's why courts recognize it the most, because it's impartial, it's objective. It's only there to tell you what it is, and it's up for us to interpret it. And as you mentioned, which I think is a great thing to say, even though that type of evidence is purely objective, it's black and white, you still have people who will interpret it their own way to fit whatever narrative they have. And that's our justice system, folks. That's just how it is. We don't make the rules. But, they could see one thing and say, oh, you think that's green? Well, I think it's an ocean blue or whatever. And it's subjective, which it shouldn't be. But that's why this type of evidence is extremely valuable. And we shouldn't, as Stephanie said, we shouldn't just throw it out.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, if you had like surveillance footage to accompany the cell phone data, that would be great. If you had like traffic cams, stuff like that, surveillance footage from stores, things like that. Like for instance, Jay's at the mall with Adnan on the morning of the 13th. Do we have like surveillance footage from the mall? Like, do we have stuff like that to prove these things? It just doesn't feel like there's anything like that. But this cell phone data gives us a framework on which to build upon, understanding that it's not the muscle and the skin, it's just the bones, but the bones are better than having muscle and skin without bones, because then you can't stand up. I don't know. It's just...
Hey, you know what? I'm with you, girl. I'm with you. You need bones.
You need the bones, man. You can't just throw it out because like a couple incoming calls may not be, 100 million % accurate. It's still more accurate than knowing zero. Anyways, the next incoming call happened at 3:15 p.m. and it pinged tower L651C. So the same tower as before, but the different side. That side would actually cover the area of Adnan's house because the C side of the tower should be west of the tower. And the Best Buy would have been northwest of the tower and Woodlawn High School would have been north of that tower. So then the 3:21 p.m. call to Jen's house comes from the location of that same tower. So Jay claims he leaves Jen's at 3:40 and he gets a call as he's driving, which is Adnan saying Hae's dead and come to Best Buy. Let's go back to the cell phone records and see which call that might have been. And that's when we find that there is no other incoming call. There is no other incoming call after 3:40 p.m., not until 4:27 p.m., which doesn't work with Jay's version of events. Jay would and should have been technically at Best Buy by 3:45, 3:50 at the latest. And Jay said that this is where Adnan popped the trunk for the first time and showed him Hae's body. Remember, before it was like in like a bad part of town, a sketchy part of town. What did he call it? A strip or something where people sell drugs. But now it's happening at Best Buy. Then Adnan started going through Hae's car and taking stuff out. Jay said Adnan took out a black backpack with a brown leather bottom, Hae's keys, and her wallet. But I find this interesting because as we know, Hae's book bag was found in her car because we went over that at the beginning of this episode. And the book bag was dark blue with a brown, like kind of leather bottom. So it's still very accurate to how Jay described it. Did Jay see this book bag with Adnan? Did he see it in her car? Did Jay see Hae with the book bag at some point? Did Hae use that book bag the previous year when they'd gone to school together? He had to have seen the book bag at some point. He described it as black with a brown bottom, and it was dark blue with a brown bottom. But I suppose if you looked at it from a distance, you might think it was black. So I still think he described this book bag pretty accurately, although it doesn't appear that Adnan did remove it from the car because it was found in Hae's car.
Well, couldn't it also be another backpack? Because those backpacks, I remember them, like the bags with the leather bottoms. I don't know what brand it was. Was it LL Bean or something like that?
Jansport, maybe?
Jansport, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very common, like, cool backpack.
Yeah.
And they have them in black, blue, purple, green, brown, whatever color you want. They made it. So could they be a similar bag because it's such a popular brand? Yeah, of course. That's an option as well.
So she had two book bags?
Or could Adnan have had thrown that backpack in there when he had gotten into the car with her and took it back out with him because it was his bag?
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He gets in the car with her because he's got his backpack on, throws in the back seat, and takes her items into his bag because he's going to dispose of it later.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, even though Jay said he saw him throw it into the dumpster, so maybe Jay just didn't see what he threw in the dumpster and he just assumed he threw but then he came back to the car and he didn't have a book bag. So no, Jay's definitely making it seem like this is Hae's book bag and her keys and her wallet, and Adnan is disposing of these things in a dumpster.
Well, that ain't true because, like you just said, bag's in there and there was no, and by the way, the bag was in there, but there were no keys.
No keys, no pager. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jay said they left Best Buy and they drove to Forest Park, and on the way, Jay placed a call to a friend of his to see if he had weed. Jay said his friend's name was Patrick, and on the cell phone records, we do have a call to Patrick at 3:59 p.m., which does match up with the timeline, even though many of the previous calls do not. So the Patrick call pings off of Tower L651A, which is the area that covers Woodlawn High School, and it's east of the Best Buy. And Forest Park also happens to be east of that Best Buy as well. So the story does make sense if Jay's leaving Best Buy and driving to Forest Park, that the cell phone would ping at Tower L651A as he's driving from Best Buy to Forest Park and he calls Patrick. So that actually does work. But before the Patrick call and after the call to Jen's house, we have a few other calls to discuss. Keep in mind that throughout all of this, Adnan claims he was at school. His version of the events that happened on January 13th never changed, but they're also very, very vague. Adnan said he drove to school that morning. He was in photography class from 7:45 a.m. to 9:15 a.m. He had English class from 9:15 a.m. to 10:40 a.m. This was the class where he put a stuffed reindeer on Stephanie's desk. Then Adnan said he called Jay at 10:45 a.m. and offered to lend him his car. Lunch period started at 10:45 a.m. Adnan said Jay dropped him back off at school by 11:30 a.m. And Adnan also said he never went shopping with Jay at all. Now, Jay claims that while they were at the mall that day, Adnan may have bought something from the food court for lunch. So did the police pull Adnan's financial records to see if he had purchased anything at the mall that day? If Adnan had used cash, I suppose there'd be no way to tell if he purchased food at the mall. But did the police check surveillance cameras at the mall? Did Woodlawn High School not have a check-in or check-out policy or some sort of system for students who were like leaving and entering the campus? Would Adnan have been able to leave school and return anytime he wanted without signing in or out? You know, that's crazy to me. Did Adnan see anyone during his free period that went from 11:15 a.m. to 12:50 p.m.? It appears that he didn't see anyone or no one saw him. And this has always bugged me, right? Because why would Jay make up a story where Adnan is with him for the majority of the morning and most of the afternoon and evening when it could so easily be proven wrong? You know, Jay could have gone to the police and said, you know, Adnan was with me at this time. And all it would take would be one teacher to come forward and say, no, Adnan took a test on this day, so I know he was in my class. Or on this day, Adnan talked to me about his grades. And Jay's story would have totally dissolved. It just would take one person who remembered seeing Adnan during any time that Jay said they were together, and it would have been over. He would have no way of knowing what Adnan was doing all day at school or who he was talking to. And any one of those things could have completely disproved Jay's story. Yet it's been almost impossible to find one person who can confirm absolutely that Adnan was at school at certain times when he claimed to be.
Yeah, it seems like an awful big risk for someone to take if you're trying to frame someone, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? You're just hoping that you're going to make up this whole story and just pray that no one at school can definitively discredit what you're saying.
Or he's not taking a test or handing in a
Right.
paper or, you know, grabbing
Right.
a snack with a friend, anything.
But imagine there's a moment at school where he's with teachers talking about something or something significant that maybe 50 people witnessed. Well, Jay, you just hung yourself out to dry now because there's 25 people at school who are saying you're wrong. But if we're to believe it again, Jay's framing Adnan. He's hoping, he's banking on the idea that during his free period, Adnan's just going to be floating around school and nobody's going to see him and be able to disprove what he's saying to police. It's a risk.
During his free period and, you know, like what, the 40 minutes he was late to psychology class as well. You know, what was he doing? Nobody saw him in the halls. There was no teacher who was like, Adnan, what are you doing wandering around the halls? The class is in session. Get your class right now. Nothing happened. Jay would be taking a huge risk to make these claims, and everything hinged on these claims that his timeline was correct, and not knowing who was going to come forward and prove him wrong with something substantial.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother ball of wax right there, is the fact that Adnan is obviously disputing what Jay's saying, but coincidentally, there's really only one thing that could have helped or hurt Adnan that day, which is being in class when he said he was there. And ironically, on that day, the teacher was taking attendance, and he happens to show up 40 minutes late. We talk about being unlucky. That's another example of the one day you wouldn't want to be late to a class, that would be it. So again, could be just a shitty set of circumstances, or it could be one of those old where there's smoke, there's fire, and although Jay's off at times, maybe a lot of what he's saying is true.
Yeah, so like we said, psychology class started at 12:50 p.m. and Adnan didn't show up till 1:27 p.m. But according to Adnan, he's been at school since like 11:30. School let out at 2:15 p.m. And during the Serial podcast, Sarah Koenig talked to Adnan while he was in prison. And she asked him, what did you do that day after 2:15 p.m.? Because this is when the prosecution claims Hae Min Lee was killed, like between 2:20 and like 2:45, 3 o'clock. Something happened in this very short window. Where were you? And Adnan said, quote, well, then when school was over, I would have went to the library. I know that I usually check. Well, I didn't usually check, but if I was going to check my email, it would be using the library computer. Sometimes I would go there because track practice didn't start until maybe 3 o'clock or 3:30-ish. So it didn't start right after school. So there was a period of time of almost like an hour and some change that was kind of free time, end quote. So Adnan never told Sarah definitively that he went to the library that day. He kind of made it seem like he couldn't remember exactly what he did, but that, on a day like January 13th, he would have gone to the library to kill time before track practice. Adnan then claimed he would have been at track practice from 3:30 to 4:30 or 5 p.m. Jay picked Adnan up from school between 4:30 and 5, and because it was Ramadan, Adnan said that he and Jay probably went to grab some food, and then they probably smoked some weed. By 6 p.m., Adnan claims he and Jay were at Kathy's house. Now, Kathy was a friend of Jay's and a close friend of Jen Pusateri's. We're going to talk about her very soon. And this is where Adnan claims he was when he got a call from Officer Adcock asking about Hae. And then Adnan believes he went to pick up food for his father, which he delivered to his father at the mosque between 7 and 8 p.m. And then evening prayers were held at the mosque between 8 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. And Adnan's father testified that Adnan was at the mosque, even though we know that Adnan was making several phone calls at this time and could not have been at the mosque deep in evening prayer. So now that brings us to his hour and change in the Woodlawn Public Library. There should be a way to prove he was there, and that is the crucial time where prosecutors believe Hae was snatched and killed. And Adnan is insistent when he says he did not leave the area of the school. He says he did not leave the campus before track practice was over. Once again, a track practice that no one was able to say for sure that he was at. Well, actually, Adnan said he can only say he's 99% sure that he didn't leave the campus of Woodlawn High School because, quote, the reason I can't say 100 is because, I do kind of understand that it comes across as, I don't know if it does or doesn't, but it seems like I remember things that are beneficial to me. But things that aren't beneficial to me, I can't remember. It's just that I really don't know what to say beyond the fact that a lot of the day that I do remember, it's bits and pieces that come from what other people have said they remember, right? And it kind of jogs my memory. Yeah, I don't know what to say, and I completely understand how that comes across. The only thing I can say is, man, it was just a normal day to me. There was absolutely nothing abnormal about that day, end quote. And people have taken issue with this statement, and I agree. The statement that he couldn't remember what happened on January 13th because January 13th was just like any other day and there was nothing different about it that would have stuck out and caused him to remember details more specifically because, in my opinion and others' opinions, there was some things about that day that were abnormal or different from any other day. Firstly, it was his friend Stephanie's birthday. He, gave her a present. He would have remembered that. He did remember that. He left school. That day he left school and he left his car and his brand new cell phone in the possession of a drug dealer who he wasn't even really close friends with. And he was also celebrating Ramadan, which, last time I checked, that only happens once a year. So that kind of stands out as being a little bit different than any other day. On top of all of that, he got a call from a police officer letting him know that his ex-girlfriend and his best friend had not picked her little cousin up from school, had not shown up to her job, and had not come home. He got a call that Hae Min Lee was missing and no one knew where she was. And I would say that any one of those things might distinguish January 13th from any other day.
Yeah, I concur, and I would say that I wouldn't be recalling what other people said. I would be spending every second from the time that cops start to question me back when he was a young teen, not only now, when I'm sure he did this interview and gave that quote, but that day breaking down exactly step for step what I did. Even if I went to the bathroom to go for 20 seconds, I would have a written timeline of everything I did from the time last period ended to the time that I ended up at track practice. And I would have every notation of conversations I had, jokes I told to so-and-so, or said hi to the coach, because maybe it would jog their memory about seeing me. Hey, you don't remember if I was at practice? You don't remember I came over and tugged on your shorts and said that you need to get a smaller size because they were falling off? Something stupid, something trivial that may help you.
Yeah.
I would remember everything, especially if my freedom was at risk. And now you could make the argument that maybe he didn't know that at the time, so he didn't take it that serious. Again, he's 17, not 7. When they start calling around for his ex-girlfriend, friend, he has to know that he's someone that's going to be looked into, especially when he starts hearing about teachers asking questions about him as well. You're going to make sure that you have your I's dotted, your T's crossed, so that whatever they're thinking you could be involved in, you put the kibosh to that immediately by supporting whatever you're stating with tangible facts that you can go back and say, hey, here's where it was. This is who I spoke to. Go talk to him.
So what they're saying is basically, you know, from the time Hae went missing, which was January 13th, to the time that Adnan was arrested, which was over a month later on February 28th, he couldn't think back that far and specifically recall events of that day, which is fine. But what you're saying, and I completely agree with you, is right from the get, as soon as Hae went missing and then didn't show up within a few days, and then, you know, the teachers are asking questions and the police are at school, this is just a couple of days, a week tops after Hae goes missing. This is when Adnan should have been like, okay, like I need to make sure that I can account for my whereabouts on this day because they may come after me. So while it's fresh in my mind, let me make sure I have like, you know, a quick notation of what I did during this day and how I can prove that I did these things in case worst comes to worst and I'm sitting in an interrogation room in a month.
Stephanie, stop me if I'm wrong. They called him that night.
They did call him that night, but I don't think they asked him like, what were you doing that day? But his should have been assigned to him. Yeah.
I know how I was at 17. If the police if I'm even on their radar as a person who might know her whereabouts, I'm going to make sure that I know my whereabouts just in case. I mean, he's seen enough movies, TV to know when there's a very short list, the cops who don't know him from a hole in the wall are calling him by 6 p.m. to say, do you know where Hae is? So
and
that's
you were
something
supposed
where,
to, we heard she was going to give you a ride after school.
Yeah. I'm going to start being like, oh, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere. She might be just with someone, but just in case, what was my day today? So in case they call me back again, I can give them some specifics. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. And once again, maybe it's just an innocent kid not looking at it from a negative perspective where it's like, why would they ever think it was me? I didn't do anything wrong. And so he didn't go those extra steps. And it's always easy to say what you would have done in hindsight. So I'll concede that fact. But it just, again, seems like a lot of things that could have been done differently by a lot of different people. And maybe we wouldn't be in the situation we are today.
But for me to like not even know what you did after school that day at all, I have a very, very good memory. People hate it because I'm always like, especially, you know, my husband, because he's like, oh, I said this. And I'm like, no, you didn't say this. You said exactly this. And you were standing at this place in the kitchen when you said it. And you were wearing this shirt. Like, and it doesn't matter if it's been a week or a month. I will remember. And that's just how I've always been. So maybe I can't.
I would debate that.
Really? Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. There's been a few different bloopers that haven't made this real where you said, oh, I said this. And I was like, no, you didn't. And then our editor's like, no, Derek, she didn't say it.
What, when I heard that meow? When I heard the phantom meow?
That's one thing. They don't even know about that. But yes, that's one thing where you're so good too. You'll say it and you make me question myself where you're like, no, Derek, it was this time, this date. And I'm like, dude, maybe she is right. And it isn't until we go back and look at the tape, thank God, where I'm like, no, she's full of shit. She's
wrong. Saying I'm gaslighting you is what you're saying.
I don't even like that phrase. But
I hate it.
You know,
I hate it.
Yeah, but no, you do have a good memory. I'll give you that.
So I mean, like when I need to. So I guess I can't remember somebody just having no concept of like what they did on a day when your best friend and ex-girlfriend vanished and never came back home. So that's I've always had a trouble with that. But, I do want to touch on the library thing because he said he may have been in the library. That's what he would normally do, right? It's what he would normally do if he was waiting and killing time between track practice and school. And actually, I don't even know if that's what he would normally do because I've heard several variations. A lot of people said Hae would give him a ride home so he could change. But I also found a memo from his defense team where Adnan told his defense team, one of the clerks for his lawyer, that oftentimes after school, before track practice and before Hae had to pick up her little cousin from her school, Hae would bring Adnan to the Best Buy parking lot in her car and they would have sex there. And that became like kind of their thing, their place to have sex in her car in Best Buy parking lot after school and before Hae picked up her cousin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's significant.
So if I guess Adnan was going to think about like what he usually did after school and before track practice, it would be having sex with Hae in her car in the Best Buy parking lot, not necessarily going to the library.
To be fair, he did say in this quote, it does seem like a lot of the times I have the ability to remember things that benefit me and the things that don't, I don't remember. That's his words, not mine.
Yeah. How is that to be fair?
Well, to be fair to him, he wouldn't remember that because that would be incriminating.
I see.
Yeah. So he's not going to remember something that would put him in the area where allegedly he showed his co-conspirator the body.
It's crazy. I mean, once again, this is not something, this like little notation in this law clerk document, it doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is there.
Why wouldn't this get talked about a lot?
Are you being sarcastic or facetious?
Yeah, I'm saying,
with me?
why wouldn't this get talked about a lot? I haven't heard about this at all.
It doesn't necessarily fit the popular narrative, honestly.
Okay. All right. Well, we're talking about it here.
Listen, let's talk about the library for a minute because
let's talk about the library.
You'd think this is a library. This is the public library, so it's not affiliated with the school, but it's directly across the street from the school. So obviously kids are always going over there to get books. And like, once again, I have a problem with this high school just letting people come and go willy-nilly. How is there any safety here? There's no sign of Adnan checking back into school after Jay drops him back off. He just seems to go and leave the school and then come back whenever he wants. Okay, so they leave, they go to the library all the time. It's right across the street. There were surveillance cameras in the library, but they would get reset every week. So basically there was a Monday tape and a Tuesday tape and a Wednesday tape. And then every day they would put that tape in. But then the next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they would put that same tape back in and it would, get recorded over from the previous week. So technically, even if the police had grabbed those tapes as soon as Adnan was a suspect or as soon as they had his alibi that he was in the library, which I don't even think he told them that until he was arrested, it would have been too late. Now, there was a sign-in sheet to use the computers, and Adnan said he believes he would have been there using the computer to check his email, but it was just a sheet of paper that would get tossed out at the end of the night. And we can't really get into it right now because I want to move on with Jay's second interview. But next week, we are going to dig into the Asia McClain alibi. Asia was the girl who claims she saw Adnan at the library on January 13th. But believe it or not, it's not as straightforward as it may seem. So we're going to talk about that. But according to Adnan's versions of events, he was not with Jay until 4:30 or 5 p.m. And if you look at his cell phone records that day, we might actually believe that was the case, right? Because most of these calls that were being made on the cell phone were being made to people that Jay knew. Jen Pusatteri's being called a lot. Patrick, the drug dealer, who was a friend of Jay's. Patrick didn't even know Adnan. Phil, once again, friend of Jay's, didn't know Adnan. But then we see a call at 3:32 p.m., a call that lasted 2 minutes and 22 seconds. And it was placed to a girl named Nisha. Nisha was a high school student in Silver Spring, Maryland, who Adnan met at a New Year's Eve party just a few weeks prior to the disappearance of Hae Min Lee. They had hung out, they'd exchanged numbers, they danced, and they'd been talking over the phone for the past couple of weeks, getting to know each other. We can see that Nisha's the first person Adnan called when he got his new phone on the 12th, and he called her several more times that night and several times the next day, including that 3:32 p.m. call. But this call probably looks more worse for Adnan than anything else because at 3:32, Adnan claims he was at Woodlawn High School at the library waiting for track practice to start. So why is Jay Wilds, a kid who doesn't know Nisha, who's never met her or spoken to her, calling Nisha and talking to her for over 2 minutes? This call puts Adnan and his cell phone together at a time when he claimed he was absolutely not with his cell phone. He was at school. He wasn't with Jay yet. This call puts him at a place and a time where Hae's body would have been being buried at Leakin Park. So it's like a very bad look. And the police did ask Jay about this call, and Jay claimed that when the call happened, he and Adnan were in the car together. Adnan called Nisha and then handed the phone to Jay so that Jay could say hello. And then I remembered that interview with Adnan's brother. Remember the one I talked about last episode? And I remembered he was talking about Nisha. So I went back to it really quick, and he did in fact mention Nisha. He said that she went to high school in Kensington. She was going to George Mason University in the fall, and Nisha had told him that she'd talked to Adnan that day around 3:30 p.m. So during Adnan's first trial, Nisha testified, and she was asked by Adnan's attorney, Christina Gutierrez, if she could remember a time that Adnan had called her and then put a person named Jay on the phone. Nisha said, quote, "It's a little hard to recall, but I remember him telling me that Jay invited him over to a video store that he worked at, and he basically, well, Adnan walked in with the cell phone and then he said, like, he told me to speak with Jay, and I was like, okay, because Jay wanted to say hi. So I said hi to Jay, and that's all I can really recall," end quote. Nisha said she recognized Adnan's voice on the phone. The call lasted only a couple of minutes, and she thought the time of the day was towards the evening. She said she couldn't remember the exact day, but she knew it had to have been sometime in January. Now, the only problem with that is that Jay didn't work at that adult video store on January 13th. It seems he was actually unemployed on this date. He would start at the video store, I think it was like the next week, but it was towards the end of January. And supporters of Adnan claim that this call must have been a butt dial, that Nisha was on speed dial, which she was, and Jay accidentally hit the button, which called her. But for this to be true, a lot of other things would have to be true. That would mean that no one else was at home at Nisha's house because the phone would have had to have rung for over 2 minutes because according to Nisha, she did not have an answering machine or a voicemail. And it kind of made it seem like this was a private number for her, like maybe there was 2 phones in her house and one was for like the main house, and this phone was mainly just for her that her friends would call her on. Now, there's a lot of theories about this, and Rabia Chaudhry posited the theory that Nisha could have had voicemail, which was newer technology in 1999, but she just didn't know that she had voicemail. So whoever called her that day at 3:30 just left a very long voicemail message that was basically sent to the void when no one checked it. Now, I don't really know how accurate that is, considering that at this time, voicemail would have been an additional charge to your phone bill. So it was something you'd have to like agree to, sign paperwork, and you would have seen it on your bill. So I feel like Nisha or her parents would have known whether or not she had voicemail at this point. Another Rabia theory is that someone was home at Nisha's and they picked up the phone and just listened in silence for 2 minutes trying to figure out who was calling. But I don't know how accurate that is either, because for me, I feel like 2 minutes is a long time to just sit there and listen to butt dial noises. And wouldn't someone at Nisha's house have remembered that and, said something when the topic of this call came up and Nisha, their daughter, is like going to court to testify about it? Rabia has also suggested that the phone just rang for over 2 minutes. But I did look into this, and as far as I can tell, if one cell phone is calling another, you could get charged for that call if it just rings and no one answers. But if a cell phone is calling a landline, which was the case here, there should be no charge unless the call connects, meaning either a person answers or a voicemail or answering machine picks up. And for that call to have shown up on Adnan's bill and for him to be charged for it, it does mean that it connected. So another theory states that Jay called Nisha as a way to set up Adnan and make it look like he was with him. But Nisha did say she talked to Adnan first. She recognized Adnan's voice. And then an interesting theory states that the call was made by Adnan because he called Nisha a lot, so he did it accidentally, and then later he realized that it looked bad for him and it kind of like killed his whole alibi of being at school. So on February 14th, the following month, Adnan actually did pay a visit to Jay while Jay was working at this adult video store. And Adnan did get Nisha on the phone and told her Jay wanted to say hello, and then put Nisha on the phone with Jay so that when Nisha was testifying about this, she would remember that phone call and think it was the January 13th call, if that makes sense. When the police initially spoke to Nisha, they didn't ask her about the specific call on January 13th. They didn't say to her like, oh, when Adnan called you on January 13th, what did you talk about? They simply asked her, hey, did you ever talk to Adnan? And did he ever put his friend Jay on the phone? So this theory does actually make sense that she may have been confusing the two calls because the police asked her specifically about a call where Jay had been put on the phone. And so she would have remembered that February 14th call, which Jay did confirm happened as well. So what do you think about this?
I mean, that's a lot.
I know.
That's a lot to take in. It all depends on how much I would have to be sitting there listening to Nisha at court and how convincing she was that the call that she was remembering happened in January and not a month later in February. You know what I mean? So that's something where how convincing was she at court where she said, no, I remember a call in January where he called me and put Jay on the phone, or was she really apprehensive, indecisive about when she heard the call, when it happened? But I do think, and I know I sound like a broken record tonight, it just seems like a lot of things that happened around the day that this is the day in question. And there's always an excuse. There's always a reasoning for it. It's not just one thing. There's all these different things that can be explained away. And we have this guy, Jay, who we're not supposed to believe. And yet he's saying things to investigators that make sense with a lot of the call logs for that day. So it's tough. I'd be a fool to sit here and say it's impossible that this can all be explained away. But there was also another thing, not to kind of curve away from this. I got a DM from someone, and don't make this a habit of DMing me. I don't check all my DMs, but she was saying to me, hey, Derek, just be aware too that there is a belief that Adnan didn't give Jay his phone that day. He had just kind of forgot it in the glove box of the car. So, and just to respond to that, if that were the case, I don't know if Jay would have been making all these phone calls on his cell phone if he didn't have his permission. So that doesn't really make sense to me either for the person who DM'd me about it.
I'm pretty sure Adnan admitted that he gave Jay his phone so that he could call Jay and let him know when to pick him up after track practice.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And like I said, if you guys hit me with a million DMs, I'm not going to respond to everyone, but I did respond to her and say, oh, good to know. Thanks. And you know what I mean? I'm listening to you tonight talk about specifically about the calls. Doesn't seem like that would be the case. You know,
yeah, but what do you think about this Nisha call? The point of the matter is Jay would not have called Nisha. And
he doesn't even know who she is.
He doesn't even know who she is. And she remembered speaking to Adnan. And what the problem is it's not like it's an 18-second call where you could have said, oh, this is a butt dial, or, you know, no one picked up and no conversation happened. It looks as if a conversation happened. I can't imagine why the phone would connect for that long when there was no voicemail or answering machine attached to the phone. Why it would connect for that long. So it does appear some sort of conversation happened, and the only person who would have any reason to call Nisha would be Adnan, which puts him with Jay and the cell phone at 3:30, which completely destroys his statement that he was at school this whole time.
Yeah, I agree. It's terrible. Doesn't look good for him, and I would go even a little further just to say if this theory that it was a butt dial, because we know that call happened. Like you said, there was a 2-minute call made on that day at that time.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt about it. So yeah, if you're going with the idea that Jay was in the possession of the phone, there was a previous call the day before made by Adnan to Nisha. So Jay's in the car without Adnan because Adnan's at school, and there's a butt dial. I would think that someone at Nisha's home, whether it's Nisha or her parents, would remember having this voicemail, hearing this butt dial, and I don't believe they wouldn't remember distinctly hearing two voices, Adnan and Jay's voice. So I feel like they would follow up on that to say, hey, did you ever have a voicemail on your phone at home that from Adnan that was a butt dial? And Nisha would have gone, oh yeah, actually, you know what? I did.
No, she said
did
she
have
doesn't.
that.
She doesn't have voicemail. She didn't have voicemail. And she didn't have an answering machine. She didn't.
That's
have
what I'm
those
saying.
things. Yeah.
She would remember that, or
Yeah.
if the parents had it or whatever, someone would remember it, or like you just said, there would be a record of having that voicemail service.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I believe that call happened.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that call happened. I'm just going to, I don't, Occam's razor, right? Simple explanation's usually the right one. I know sometimes things aren't always how they appear, but based on the fact that Nisha was someone known that wasn't even at the school where Adnan went to school, wasn't someone that frequented his circle where Jay would have ran into her.
And she says this in the trial. She said, no, I never spoke to Jay before that day. I've never met him. Adnan's never even talked about him. It was literally like just this person, Jay, suddenly existed. And Adnan was like, here, talk to my friend Jay, which seems odd, right? Like, that seems odd in general to even do that. Like, why would you do that? She doesn't know Jay from Adam, and you're suddenly, like, shoving this girl that you have just met 2 weeks ago, and you're kind of, like, trying to mac it to, and you're trying to get close to, and you're like, here, talk to my friend Jay, for, like, absolutely no reason. It does almost seem like this is, like, building an alibi of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it could be. It could be because it is stupid why you would call someone after murdering your ex-girlfriend, but if your motive or if your meaning behind it is to, like you said, have her come down later and say he couldn't have done it, he was calling me with his buddy Jay, they definitely weren't involved. You know, so that would make sense. But on the surface, from what you've explained,
it did seem like his legal team for like the first 6 months were kind of looking, because they were talking about in their notes, you can see they were talking about that call to Nisha, and they were almost looking at it as like it was good for him, like it was an alibi of some sort. And then I think once the prosecution like posed to them their timeline, the defense was like, oh, this isn't an alibi. This actually puts Adnan in a place where he claims he wasn't. And then suddenly the Nisha call was like dropped from the defense's notes and stuff.
Yeah, no, when they realize that their client has said, I never left the school, well, they're not going to support something that shows him leaving the school, because now, just like everybody else we've spoken about, it brings into question everything they've said. And so for me, what you've explained here with the phone calls, who they're calling, when they're calling, nobody really having any memory of Adnan being at the school other than Aisha, who we're going to get into, and that being somewhat weak from what I've read as well. Yeah, it sounds like the call happened. Now, is that a situation where it's because Adnan's guilty and he's trying to hide it? Is it something where Adnan did leave for a little bit and meet up with Jay, and at the time when he was talking to police, he lied about it because he thought it was going to make him look guilty? In reality, Jay was just picking him up to strengthen his framing of Adnan. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but that's the territory we're in right now. Did Jay pick him up to put Adnan in the area where this all happened, and then Adnan, trying not to implicate himself, lied about the fact that he left school, making it worse for himself? Yeah, I guess, but if I'm
Jay
just
doesn't seem that smart to me. Like, not that he's not smart. I don't mean like he's not that smart. I mean, he doesn't seem smart enough to like have that kind of foresight and planning. Yeah.
That's some deep. Listen, if you want to frame someone, right, in this particular case, you go do what you got to do. You get the car back and you let the police put it together. You don't add all these different layers that could not work out the way you planned and ruin the whole thing. You want to add as little amount of details to it that can be cross-referenced and contradict what you want them to believe. So the butt dial, which could be accidental, calling from his phone multiple times per day, calling your friend Jen on the phone, all these different things would hurt the framing. You do it, you get back, you drop the car off, you go home, you smoke a blunt, and you let the chips fall where they may. You don't keep ingraining yourself into it. So,
dude, you're right.
You know,
if he went into that whole, if Jay did this and he went into it with the intention to frame Adnan, it would have been one of those keep it simple, stupid moments. You know, like, why are you calling all these people, and why are you, driving around, and why are you making a paper trail, like a digital paper trail of where you are and what you're doing, when you could just get in, get out, and then, like you said, wait for the police to find the evidence and put two and two together themselves.
Yeah. But we'll cover the other angles. We'll give you the devil's advocate possibility here, as far as there's someone who possibly saw him at the library, which would contradict this phone call and him being there. There's still a lot more to go. I've, like I said, scratched the surface a little bit. I know Stephanie has a lot more. There's more parts here, so we're hoping that you're getting a lot out of this. We're not trying to stretch this out. In fact, I'll be the first to tell you it's now 1 o'clock in the morning where we are. Last week was one of the longest episodes we've ever produced. This episode is going to beat that by a lot, but this is going to be a long episode, and so we hope you're getting a lot out of it. It all seems like substance to us. I'm trying to keep the opinions limited so Stephanie can get through it, and even with doing that, it's still 3 hours, but overall, Stephanie and I were saying it before we started, we're absolutely fascinated by this case because there are so many things about it that 1 second you're thinking one thing and then the next you're like, well, wait a second, that kind of goes in the face of what I just thought. And now you're arguing with yourself. And so it's a fascinating case. It sucks that we're talking about it when you have this young woman who is killed by someone who's an absolute monster. And yet there's so many layers to it where you might actually have 2 victims in this case, which is what makes it unique. So we really got to do our due diligence and make sure that we're covering it the way we want to cover it, because this goes into our catalog and it's going to be there forever. And we want to look back and say, you know what, we did it the best we could. We didn't skip things. We didn't cut it short because of time. And this is probably going to be our longest series ever, both time-wise and episodically. So yeah, I hope you guys are getting a lot out of it, because we are. I know I am.
Yeah, this is crazy. All right, let's wrap it up and go to bed. We'll be back next week. Thank you guys. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Check Criminal Coffee Company out. And until then,
stay safe. Stay safe out there, and don't butt dial anybody, folks.
Don't do it.
Have a good night.
Bye.